All right, the Boston Celtics did not get a good grade in Danny and my off-season grades podcast, which I think was that this week. I've completely lost track of time with all the pods we're doing, but it's time to bring in Jared Weiss of The Athletic and talk a little Boston Celtics. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I haven't heard the grade. I'm gonna assume it's a C plus.
Is that's no, it was well below that actually.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Well, so you thought they had a good offseason?
I think C plus is a mediocre grade. What kind of curve are we?
Well, C is average for us. Are you like? Did you just graduate from business school or something? Where
I went.
B
I went to
plus
B.
is average.
I went to BU, so a C plus there was an A at Harvard. So I guess I actually am on board with what you're. That's not even a joke. Like that was actually statistically accurate. It was a major thing we hated back then. But whatever. I did make it through college just barely, and based on a BU grading scale, then I guess I would give them a C minus because it was definitely a below average off season. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't terrible, but it definitely was. If C is good, then it definitely was below that for sure. So they're like C minus flirting with the D plus there.
Well, I think we got to get to the elephant in the room quickly, and that is the status of Kemba Walker. Was that?
Oh, okay. I thought you meant
Peyton Pritchard.
But yeah, we could talk about Kemba, I guess.
Why is that the elephant in the room?
No, I'm just
Peyton
kidding because they have so many elephants in the room. If you notice one little guy in the corner, But yeah, so Kemba Walker's knee is not a disaster, but it's not good either. Though I think the most important thing is trying to understand what the injury is. And you know, I just did a piece on The Athletic. I have to start plugging with Jeff Stotts, the man known to most of us as In Street Clothes, who even taught me stuff about Kemba's injury history I didn't even know. Like I didn't realize that they had diagnosed the lateral meniscus tear that he had in 2015 back when he was at UConn. Like he basically had like a torn knee for a decade before he actually had surgery on it. And so it makes it unsurprising that it certainly appears, although we don't know for sure, that he has osteoarthritis in his left knee. And it's starting, now that he's 30, it's starting to cause issues for him. And so I think that what that mostly means is that the cartilage around the meniscus in his knee is wearing thin. And so he had an injection back in February to help kind of restore the veracity of the vitality, maybe is the better word of that cartilage. And that didn't quite work, although I guess the season kind of cut short. So maybe it would have worked after he returned, but he was only back for a few weeks. And then when he got to the team in June for pre-bubble training camp, they realized, oh, wow, your knee is in way worse shape than we realized, and you're in need for a multi-month ramp-up period. And they didn't quite have enough time to pull that off, and they had to do a real truncated version of that. And so him and Danny Ainge both basically said, yeah, we kind of had to rush that a little bit because we didn't really have much of a choice. And that's why I kind of looked like crap in the bubble. And when he finally talked this week, he basically explained, the main thing I asked him was, what are you looking for as you, quote unquote, try to strengthen your knee, as the team is calling it, over the next month or two? And the main thing he said was, I'm looking to make sure that when I land, I'm not thinking about pain in my knee. And so that made it sound like when he was playing in the bubble, he was feeling a pinch in his knee every single time he was landing, that he just wasn't feeling. I mean, you know how it is when you're playing with a little bit of pain in one of your joints, you're not quite getting all the oomph and that whole kinetic chain really maximized in the way that it usually is. So that's why in the bubble, if you go back and watch the film, he front rimmed every single three that he took the entire time, which isn't surprising when, a guy at his size just doesn't quite have the usual pop that they have in their knee. Pop in a good way, not in the bad way. So now at this point, he had a stem cell injection that's going to help just kind of just improve the muscle buildup and the tissue buildup in the area around the knee. They're going to do a process that's probably going to take a couple months. They're planning on an update in the first week of January, so a month from now. I'm expecting that update to not be, hey, he's coming back tomorrow, but more, hey, he's on track and probably will be back at some point in the next few weeks, and we'll have an update for you then. But I wouldn't expect him to be ready until the end of January, early February, probably as a best case scenario.
Yeah, that seems where it's headed. And, it's interesting. Will Barton came out today as well, and it sounds like it usually when these guys have these knee issues, but they don't actually say what it is, it is kind of this arthritic condition. issues with the amount of cartilage that's still in the knee, just getting swelling, getting pain as they try to ramp up their activity. And Will Barton has said that his problem was he couldn't work out the way that he wanted to during the initial part of COVID. And I think we all have kind of even forgotten as a society that, like, no, it was actually like, I mean, maybe not every NBA player was doing this, but that like a lot of players didn't have access to the team facility. They didn't have access really to anywhere to train, particularly someone like Walker or Barton, where, you know, you really need to be monitored. You got to be getting treatment every day if you are going to work out. And so Will Barton said he came back in much worse shape to start the bubble, where you'd be like, oh, you know, you have rest. But like, you know, as someone who's had knee injuries too, like sometimes just resting and literally doing nothing makes it worse. Like you kind of need to find this sweet spot of like, okay, there's some activity, you're keeping it moving, you're strengthening it, but at the same time, you're not going too hard and inducing pain and swelling. And so you really need to be under supervision to have that. And so it seems like that, based on what you're telling me, that he wasn't really able to have that. He comes back, and then they weren't able to ramp him up quickly enough. And I mean, he had some moments in the playoffs, but I thought, you know, watching him try to beat switches, for example, you know, basically anything other than conventional pick and roll, he really wasn't able to have an impact against the defense. And he really kind of got taken out of it in both the Toronto and Miami series. So hopefully he can get right. But, you know, for a small guard at 30, having these issues, I mean, you know, it seems like one of these things where they can kind of get him to where he's semi-functional. But I also have concerns about whether we're going to see the same guy we saw in Charlotte in the 18-19 season again.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the thing is the first half of the season, he was great. I mean, he was the all-star starter. He looked like everything that they had hoped he was going to be. And then just as the season wore on, it started to set in for him. And I know people really point to him playing in the Elam ending in the all-star game as what did him in. But I mean, like, playing one extensive fourth quarter when you're already playing most extensive fourth quarters, I don't really think that's going to make much of a difference. So yeah, maybe that was the straw that broke the camel's back, but like the back was breaking no matter what, if that's what did it. So I think the concern with him is maybe less about will he eventually get back to full form this year, because they have the luxury of time at this point. There's no rush to get him back. They have Marcus Smart to run point for now. They have Jeff Teague, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later, to back him up as well. But so they don't have to have him back right away, and they can be patient. But the question is, for what we saw in the playoffs, we've seen Kemba Walker play great in the first round now 3 times. And then he got to the second round and it went really poorly. And he went up against probably the 2 best defenses in the NBA to match up against him in Miami and Toronto last year. And they just took away all the daylight that he usually was able to get on his high pick and roll game. They had length that could really contest well in the paint against him. And they just took away so much of what he did well. Now, he was able to get to like a lot of what he does well. He had a couple shots that should have been game winners, whether he got fouled and it wasn't called, or he hit the game winner in that game where Anunoby hit like one of the great buzzer beaters ever. People forget that he hit his like cardiac Kemba shot right before that shot went in. So, you know, I think maybe the narrative on him would be a little bit different if a couple of those breaks go the other way. But overall, it was pretty apparent that like when he would come over a screen and the defense would play aggressive on him, he wasn't comfortable pulling up in those tighter windows. And those are the things that he needs to be able to do in the playoffs. Otherwise, he's just not going to be an all-star in the playoffs.
So what are they going to do while he's out?
Not be good. They're going to play Marcus Smart at point. It's not definitive. I'm assuming that's what they're going to do. I don't think Jeff Teague is going to start in the meantime, even though Jeff Teague apparently is Brad Stevens' favorite player in NBA history. But so what I would do if I were them, and I guess it depends on a matchup by matchup basis, is I would slide Jaylen and Jayson down to the 2 and the 3 and start Grant Williams at the 4 next to whomever wins the center battle in camp. We'll see how that goes between Tice and Tristan Thompson. But Grant Williams, he had a really good bubble. He's shown that he's pretty flexible with his defensive roles that he can handle at this point, though he can't handle really speedy wings. But he can handle like a pretty good amount of wing assignments that you throw at him, and he can handle a good amount of big assignments you throw at him. But his spot up shooting was actually really good last season after he had that ridiculous 0 for 26 start to the season. And in the bubble, I think he shot around 40% on a couple attempts a game. So he is showing that he can legitimately stretch the floor. You could put him into handoff actions, into like, different pick and roll actions, or he can spread the floor. So he can kind of be that big helping to run the offense, or he can be that floor spacer you need out there. So I think he makes the most sense if he is still shooting well. And he says he had a really good offseason and he felt like he really expanded his off the dribble game. So if he continues to improve at the rate that he's been improving over the last year, then he probably will be a viable starter for them in the meantime.
Yeah, so it sounds like you are a big believer in what Grant Williams is going to bring this year.
Well, I mean, I'm his podcast co-host, so legally I have to, but I am. I mean, I was a big believer in him before we had a podcast together. The guy, he's like all the background that I did on him before, once he got to the team, everybody agreed that he's someone who's going to be able to really reshape his game to fit in the NBA, and then eventually be able to bring some of the skills that he had in college back with him into the NBA once he's really fine-tuned it. And that even though he's undersized, he just works so hard and so smart that he's able to make up for it. And everything that he did over the course of the year really fed into that narrative. So, I'm especially the way that his shooting improved so much over the course of the season, I think that was just a real telltale sign that he's someone who's going to continue to grow at a pretty strong pace.
Yeah, and then, of course, another guy we have to talk about potentially improving. I think it's really Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum now, that with Walker out, Brown in particular now really being the no-doubt second option. It seems like this is going to be his time. Maybe that'll be Smart and Teague a little bit, but it seems like this is going to be his time to really, he's probably scored more than people realized last year, but he did it in ways that weren't necessarily the focus of the offense, or he was making the play. Maybe there'd be something where, he's trying to get a quick duck in or like take advantage of the attention of the defense being elsewhere. But seems like this will be his time to prove, as I think maybe he's wanted to do for a couple of years, but they've had so many options to prove that he can beat someone creating on the ball as a primary option, maybe on second units at a minimum.
That'll be interesting because the Celtics usually have Tatum be the guy that's out there for the second units to run offense because he's comfortable running pick and roll in isolation.
Well,
and that's
with Walker out, there's going to be a lot of second units this year.
They're starting a second unit with Walker out, right? So,
yeah.
You're right, and that's the huge question mark, I think, with Jaylen Brown's game is Brown has proven himself to be the ideal complementary star, where he's a great spot-up player, he's a monster in transition. If he has a lane and he can attack it off the dribble and rise up and throw it down, like he could do everything that you want someone who doesn't have to create the offensive scheme for you to do. But if they're gonna win the championship, they need him to kind of step beyond that or shoot 50% from deep, which I don't think he's going to quite pull off. So yeah, they're going to need him to be able to run pick and roll. They're going to need, especially when a defense is out there blitzing on Jayson Tatum, which I think we're going to start seeing a lot more this year. And defenses started doing that in the second half of last season and obviously in the bubble. So when Tatum is getting blitzed and they need to take the ball out of his hands, Jaylen needs to be able to be the guy that goes up there, gets that kick out from him, and is able to lead 4-on-5 or 4-on-3 basketball from there. And that's hasn't really quite been his game. He's been more the guy that he plays off to the side of the play, or they run handoffs and stuff like that to get him into the play. And so he's going to need to be the one that really leads the action. And I mean, he's grown really well. He's improved on all of his shortcomings throughout his career, and that's just kind of like the next big hurdle. But clearing that hurdle, I think, is a lot different than refining your jump shot and being able to handle in transition and stuff like that. Handling and decision making in half court, that's like the hardest skill in the game, and that's why the big stars are the guys that do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think he's taken some strides as a passer, and I think just slowing down just in general when he gets into the lane to make a decision instead of just feeling like he has to go a million miles an hour at the rim. I think he could be able to make some hay out of the post a little bit as well. He's got like a nice little fadeaway. If he gets a mismatch, he can really back down and get fouled. It'll be really interesting to see. I mean, I think his development has been pretty solid, other than a rough start to the year, the last Kyrie year, which was not something that I think a lot of people want to remember. in Boston. So yeah, there's going to be a ton of pressure on him, and if he can really, reach an all-star level this year, that can make up for the loss of potentially Kemba Walker and obviously the loss of Gordon Hayward as well. While we're talking about that, I mean, what is your comment on how things played out with Hayward? The fact that they did not want to do a sign and trade with Indiana, and now they end up with this $27 million trade exception. Is that how you would have played things out if you were them? And what was out there in sign and trade as best you're able to figure out that they didn't want to do with Indiana?
Yeah, I mean, I was on board with Turner, and I'm of the thought process that 18 million isn't 27 million, so it's something you can live with for an overpriced center. And I was a believer that you put Turner in a more spread offense with a high frequency pick and roll point guard that can really turn him into a positive roll man or a pop man, that he'll be a lot more effective. And then also with the Celtics defensive scheme, the way that they defend pick and roll, the fact that they have so many great wing defenders, that bigs tend to look great in their defensive scheme as long as they know how to execute the scheme. I just figured that Turner would really take a leap in Boston, and so I would have made the move for him. But I'm going to trust the Celtics that they know better than I do on their scout of Turner, and it's very clear that they just don't feel that way about Turner. And so they're willing to surrender probably a lot more draft capital to try to work the trade market over the next year or so. And hey, at least, they've always valued flexibility more than just about any GM in the league. They've been really willing to acquire draft picks instead of talent, prioritizing retaining their draft picks instead of trading it for talent, stuff like that. So it really wasn't a surprise that they would rather get the flexibility of the TPE, even if that's going to cost them more draft picks down the road or more young players down the road to really make the use of it, than get Turner and McDermott that probably are going to just even depreciate in asset value even more as you pick them up. So I understand it from that perspective. But the whole thing with Ainge this whole time has been he's amazing at setting the table, but you got to deliver a delicious meal at some point. And they keep missing on all these windows to potentially win the championship, and presumably with Tatum and Brown that window is going to stay open for a while. But if you lose this opportunity you had where you had so much overwhelming talent, and because of a lot of poor luck and because of a few other factors on top of that, it didn't work out, the worry is that you're just never going to be able to get to that level of talent that's sufficient to actually win the title.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And they, in some ways, you could say, well, they were right there last year, and they outscored Miami in that series, and they should have beaten Miami. I picked them to do so. But in another way, I think they really lucked out that they didn't have to go against Milwaukee, and I think they would have been really drawing dead against Milwaukee due to their inability to match up with Antetokounmpo.
And we got their asses kicked.
Yeah, and so in some ways, maybe this team looks better than they should have a year ago, even though obviously they had a really wonderful regular season. And now, of course, Walker is out, and maybe he won't be back at the level that everyone hoped he would be when they signed him, and Gordon Hayward is gone. The other thing about using the $27 million trade exception is they had this issue coming up of being in the tax. But even now, as you look at where they are to start next season, the whole idea of the trade exception is you take on a bunch of salary and you don't give anything back. Well, they're already right at the tax for next season. And so they can't take on $27 million for next year. They're not going to be $20 million into the tax next year. That's just not something that, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's not something I've gotten the impression that this ownership group is willing to do. And so that, and even if they took on someone for this year, then they'd be crazy into the tax as well. So this idea that they'll just take on some guy at $27 million and not have to give anything back, that seems kind of unrealistic. And they still don't really have disposable salary either. They've got their top four guys. You're not going to want to give up Marcus Smart in some trade. He's still really important. They need some depth. And then everyone below there is either Tristan Thompson making $9 million. Maybe he's in a deal like that. And that's how they save a little bit of money. And then you've got kind of guys on rookie scale contracts. So I'm not sure that anyone who's let's see whether Bradley Beal or Rudy Gobert fits into this trade exception. Maybe, but they still are going to have to send something back at a minimum that's a significant salary if they're going to pull off a deal of that ilk.
They don't have the talent to acquire Bradley Beal because there's really no point of trading Jaylen Brown for Bradley Beal. You're not dramatically increasing your ceiling by doing that. The whole point is you want to pair those three guys together, and I assume they're not going to want to get Kemba Walker unless they think for some reason Kemba Walker and Russell Westbrook are going to be perfect together in Washington. But so you're right, Boston, unless one of these guys like Romeo Langford or Rob Williams.
And Beal does not fit into the trade exception, by the way. I mean, that was more, I think he's like, a couple thousand or a couple 100,000 ahead of it anyway, just for those people who are going to nitpick on us here, but
I had him at 100,000, which it's funny because 100,000 is kind of like $1 in Monopoly money in the NBA, and it's just so strange that they couldn't work it with Gordon Hayward. Like, hey, can you just take like an extra 200K in the first year just to make this work for us? I thought that was really interesting that they, for some reason, didn't at least just keep that option open for the sake of it. But there's too many other teams that can make great offers for Beal, or let me rephrase, that will execute a better offer for Bradley Beal when he gets traded in the near future. But so there, Rudy Gobert, that I think my story will be coming out on Monday about this, and spoiler alert, I just don't see any reason why they would trade for Gobert, because you're not going to pay him $38 million or whatever it's going to be on his next contract, and the market's going to be out there, especially in this this cap environment coming up. So it doesn't make sense for them to use this trade exception to get them someone that's only going to be here for 1 year. And I guess Gobert could be the guy that puts them over the top, but I'm a little. They don't really need him. That's not really what they need. So it really makes the most sense for them to just use a portion of that TPE this season, at least, to acquire just someone to provide the wing depth that they so desperately need right now, and then they can attack next offseason with enough money to spend that they shouldn't dive too deep into the tax if they spend it. You mentioned 20 million. I know we've kind of gone back and forth on this over the years, and I'll concede no one has ever told me this is how much they're willing to go into the tax. All their public comments have always been so unbelievably vague. Like their owner, every year he says, we're willing to pay the tax for a winning team. And no one, and then you ask him, so are you willing to pay $1 million or are you willing to pay 40 million? And then it's like, we're willing to pay the tax for a winning team. So, I get the sense that, especially considering they apparently were willing to offer around 20 million-ish or so, or if not more, to Gordon Hayward, they definitely are willing to go, that at least 10 to 20 million, somewhere in that range, into the tax, where you're getting to the first couple steps of the progressive tax, but they're not willing to go like Kelly Oubre levels into the tax necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I think for just about any team, 15 million into the tax is kind of a de facto hard cap, because that's when it's $250 per dollar going up to the 15 million mark, but then it goes up to 325 after that, and that's when you're paying basically $4.25 for every dollar that you've got on the books for a player. It's just hard to say, hey, we're gonna pay, add $5 million in salary and pay $25 million for this guy. Like, it just doesn't really seem to make sense. Go ahead. Sorry.
But just to be clear, the franchise does make enough money that they're in the similar ballpark of the other ownership groups that have been willing to cross that threshold. Those ownership groups, I feel like they had like pretty massive personal fortunes as well. So with the Celtics, it's not clear how much you're willing to bring in money from outside of the organization's revenue to be able to support them going to the tax. But they're a very valuable organization. They have a lot of real estate stuff going on. Like they should have the income to be able to support going into the tax for a couple of years.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the new additions that they're going to have. Aaron Nesmith, drafted 14th overall. Peyton Pritchard at 26. They had the 30th pick. They traded that for 2 future second rounders. And they got the same 2 guys back on 2 ways as well. First time that's ever happened with Tremont Waters and Taco Fall. We don't need to spend too much time on Taco or Tremont unless you think they're actually going to play. But I think tell us a little bit. Yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
I'll just say Waters is there's a reason why this was the first time it's ever happened, was because obviously Taco is worth his weight in gold. And then Tremont looks pretty good and looks like he should be in the rotation. And Danny Ainge, when he talked about their point guard rotation, he mentioned Peyton Pritchard, but he didn't mention Tremont, and he didn't mention Carson Edwards, who they just drafted last year and who's on a 4-year deal, which I thought that was the most interesting omission. But everyone that's watched Tremont play, I mean, he almost won MVP in the G League last year. He won Rookie of the Year. He's someone that you can put in there and he can at least run offense for 5 minutes for you and make some plays on defense. Kind of the way Shane Larkin.
He's a really good passer.
Yeah. It's just that he's 5'7".
So tell us what the Celtics got in Peyton Pritchard and Aaron Nesmith.
Yeah, starting with Nesmith, it was the exact guy who I thought they should have picked at that spot. It was kind of, he's a classic 14th pick where he's, good enough that he should be a starter in the NBA, but the ceiling on him isn't much more than like the 5th best player on a good contending team. But they have, for years, over and over, drafted guys that are really well-rounded athletes and have a lot of skills, and then they have the potential to maybe be shooters, and they finally were like, screw it, we're just getting a great shooter. And the one thing that he's going to be able to do is he's going to be able to be a classic shooting guard. He's going to run off of pin downs and catch and shoot. He's going to be able to spot up. He can attack a little bit off of closeouts. I don't know if he's going to be able to do it as a rookie, but it's definitely there. So there is definitely some room for him to grow and turn into like a Buddy Hield type, which, if Buddy Hield, I think, would still be looked at as a really good player if he wasn't so massively overpaid. But so there's definitely potential for Nesmith to be more than a 5th starter. But he does serve a pretty clear long-term need and should provide value in the short term, just being able to space the floor for them.
Yeah, the questions to me, number one, the speed of his release. Usually guys can improve that if they really showed a lot as shooters. And then number two, what he's going to be defensively. The advertisement for him, I didn't watch extensive film on him, but the evaluations I read, some of them at least believed that he can be a better defender, a little bit stronger, maybe not a stopper at that position, but someone who can kind of at least hold his own if he has to switch on to a wing scorer for a possession or two. Do you see it that way? Does the organization see it that way? Or is it more kind of like, we hope this works out, but really we draft him for shooting?
I like his defense. I mean, I think he's a legit, well-rounded two-way guy, and that's why I liked him better than like Sadiq Bey, who I think is a little bit more limited, but has some real nice feel for the game. Nesmith, he's a really good athlete. He's someone that on both ends can be really explosive. And one thing that I thought he did really well in college is that he has like a 6'10", 6'11" wingspan. It's pretty good size for a guy that's going to be playing the 2 and the 3 for the most part. And he's really able to sink in off the weak side and crash the lane to tag on whatever drive's happening, and then be able to recover and get a good contest off on the weak side when there's a kick out. And that's something that the Celtics do a ton in their current system. So I think that he actually, a lot of the stuff that he did at Vanderbilt, playing for Jerry Stackhouse, who runs a very pro-style system on both ends, I think that stuff's going to translate very nicely to the way the Celtics are going to use him. So, I don't see him being that good of a point of attack defender. He was pretty solid in college, so, he'll probably be average, I guess, in the NBA. And by the time he's getting serious enough minutes in the playoffs that teams could start targeting him, I think he will have built up his core and improved his balance to the point that he's not going to be someone you could just lower a shoulder into and really move out of the way.
How about Pritchard?
Yeah, Pritchard, he's like one of these like classic Danny Ainge types where, Danny Ainge kind of made it sound like he thinks Pritchard's like another him, basically, where he's one of those kind of warrior undersized guards that he hits all the clutch shots, he makes all the scrappy plays. He's a scrappy white guy. It's basically what his game is. And he might be kind of like if TJ McConnell could shoot, is maybe a decent comp. But he's one of these guys that's just going to bring a lot of tenacity and high energy. And he has both a solid pick and roll pull up game and a spot up game. He doesn't really have any explosiveness, at least at the NBA level, off the bounce, where he's going to be able to hit somebody with a crossover and then leave them in the dust and force rotation. But he has like the vision and the footwork that he can at least create some separation to get past a defender and he's got like just enough size and power that he can keep a defender on his hip and use some more creative finishes or tricky timing on the pass to just get through the window that's open, stuff like that. So I think he's a more viable player than Brad Wanamaker. While Brad Wanamaker was pretty solid, he just doesn't really have enough skill to make that, really make plays. While it seems like Pritchard, as he kind of comes into his own over the next couple of years, and he's pretty old. I think he's already 22. He should have enough skill set that he can be used as that third guard for a few minutes a night.
Now we get, of course, to Jayson Tatum. And Tatum really had a tough start to last year that I think people kind of forgot about in the end, but then just absolutely was on fire in January and February. Ironically, as Kemba Walker really started to drop off a little bit, that three-pointer off the dribble in a conventional pick-and-roll defense is becoming a major problem for teams. Another reason why you just basically could not play conventional pick-and-roll defense against the Celtics team. The Raptors had to go away from it. Obviously, the Heat either went zone or switched. The Sixers got murdered in the first round as a result of that. So that's a huge shot for Tatum now, and you hope that he can consolidate his gains in that area. I mean, shooting 40% on off the dribble threes out of the pick and roll, I mean, that's just completely ridiculous, and maybe he could take a step back there. But nonetheless, not that we would ever make a bet on what his 3-point percentage is going to be next year. You should have taken it, by the way. Didn't he finish over 40%?
Yeah, and what's funny was Drew Hanlon told me I shouldn't take the bet, and I told him, no, he's going to become 40%, and sure enough, it happened.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it, too, is just his shot selection is going to get so much more difficult, and it should get more difficult. I mean, if you're shooting 40% on threes off the dribble, you might as well take a few more, and even if you're 38% or 37%, you're still going to get guarded out there. It's still a great shot in the half court. But outside of the shooting, what are the other realistic steps that Tatum could take forward this year as he really looks to get into being solidly in that top 10 players in the NBA type of group?
Well, even before moving further inside, he said in his opening presser that his big thing he's been working on this offseason is moving his pick and roll pull up to the 28 to 30 foot area. So his answer to teams, his answer to the team switching up on him is, how many wings have ever been able to get into that kind of Steph Dame territory? KD does it. I'm trying to think. Luka. KD
could do it, but didn't really embrace it as much. Yeah.
Yeah, but so I think Tatum's kind of like that, that next evolution of the KD Kawhi long wing, where he's going to be pushing the 3-point line further back, and then while he's still able to do all the downhill 3-level scoring stuff that they're able to do. But so, if he can even just every once in a while take that shot, that would be huge. That started to show up in that crazy run he had in February where he won Player of the Month. There was this one shot he took in Portland where he had like a behind the back pull up from 30 and he just switched it so ridiculously. It was just, it kind of blew everybody's mind. And even Tristan Thompson cited like that game in his press conference the other day, which I thought was really interesting. So, but yeah, so, we know he's probably going to continue to get a little bit better. The degree of difficulty is going to get a lot harder for him on those kind of plays. So basically the question is, what does he do once he gets inside the 3-point line? He's got a defender on his hip, and he's got probably 2 defenders trying to trap in front of him. And so we saw in the Toronto series that's what was happening, and he was kind of panicking, and he started throwing up really bad floaters. And the same thing happened in Miami as well. And he feels really comfortable in his floater game, but he started to learn over last season that if he can use those kind of 2-footed pro hop moves that that Durant really used, that allows him to kind of split the gaps when they show up and try to trap him at the paint. And that's how he's either able to get through that kind of middle line and go one-on-one at the rim, or make kick-out passes to the corners. So once he starts doing that more consistently, which I think is his main goal for this year, that's when the free throw attempts per game starts to creep up towards double digits, which is he was at like 3 or 4 early in his career to last year. I think he got to around 7-ish or so, which is good, but not quite at the superstar level. And getting towards 9 to 10 a game, I think, is that real top 10 player in the league kind of level. So if he gets to that, I think it's just going to open up a lot more for him. And he's already gotten pretty bulked up. There's definitely more room for him to go, but I think a lot of his improvement has just been like he's finally strong enough to play with physicality and push guys off. And so I wonder if there's going to be diminishing returns in that growth over the next few years, just because he's already bulked up so much from where he started. He doesn't have that much more further to go in that kind of growth.
Yeah, so give you some stats here, which will kind of tie into this analysis. Only 5 free throw attempts per 36 minutes. That's for a guy who's scoring 25 points a game, which I assume is where he's going to be at, maybe even more than that this year. That you'd like to see that get better. 48% from 2. Again, you'd like to see that get a little bit better. I think really the only place that I would say he's an elite offensive player is with what he's doing outside of the 3-point line right now. And 3.2 assists per 36 minutes. Again, he didn't have the ball that much. It was a very egalitarian system. You had Smart, you had Walker, you had Hayward, you had Brown, all guys who are handling the ball plenty. And, Tatum doesn't have quite that, just blow by you, get downhill, get on top of the rim, force emergency help. It's more of a meandering style to get into the lane. He's not he's a good athlete in terms of his explosiveness off the dribble, but not amazing. So I think there, in terms of the playmaking, there's a lot there. I thought the finishing really needs to get better, not only on floaters, but at the rim. And I thought he almost was turning these shots at the rim into floaters. He would keep 2 hands on the ball. He was almost shooting his jump shot off of 1 foot from within 3 feet of the rim. He has these long arms, but he's not getting the type of extension. He's not moving the ball around to have a great feel for finishing, avoiding the shot block. So improving his finishing, which is something that guys get a lot better at, I think is huge. I really was disappointed in some of his finishing in the Toronto and the Miami series. And then I think also just his one-on-one moves. I didn't think that he, against both Miami and against Toronto, maybe Toronto in particular, when it got down to the end of games and, he was going against a Fred VanVleet or Kyle Lowry, who are good individual defenders, but he has a physical advantage on them. He wasn't getting great separation. And so I think, that mid-post, turn-in-face, jab step complex stuff, even off the dribble to leverage the threat of his jump shot off the dribble to get guys moving forward and get past them. So I think those are the 2 things that are the biggest to me, is the finishing at the rim and just a little bit more moves off the dribble one-on-one, because that's teams are going to have to either switch or go zone against the Celtics. With Walker, if he's right, and with Tatum, you just can't play a conventional pick and roll defense. So he's got to get better at beating those if he's going to be effective second and third round of the playoffs where this team wants to be.
Yeah, a big thing you were touching on there is going up against guys like Lowry and VanVleet, where it definitely seemed like he wasn't comfortable putting the ball on the floor in front of those guys as much. And yes. I think a big thing for him is, he's had to really learn how to make his game more efficient in his movements over the last few years. And a big thing for him is going to be, how do I, if I'm, in the triple threat against these guys, how do I attack them more downhill, where I'm able to very quickly use my shoulder to block them off and get the ball protected. I think he's just continuing to find ways to try to protect the ball even better, because he's someone who has to really protect the ball, because he isn't able to really explode by people in the way that even Jaylen Brown is able to with his first step. So him getting more shake and getting even even being even better with protecting the ball. He last year finally started using the offhand to really push away that defender's hands and give him a little bit
maybe
more
a little too much. He definitely did do that. He got called for that, once a game during the playoffs. Danny was very focused on that during our live broadcast, rightfully so.
Yeah, and he was incredulous when he was getting called for it, and we're like, dude, you can keep, because he's good at using his forearm instead of his hand, so that it is technically legal. But then there's times where he has a guy right in his chest, and he just gives the full forearm shiver right to the chest, and he has to recognize, in NBA refs now, they're no longer only going to call that if there's a full extension. If you clearly dislodge the guy and he goes flying, even if it's a flop 35% of the time, they're going to call that. So he's gotten a lot better at knowing how to game and knowing how to work that, but also now that he's a young star and he's getting all the craftiest defenders in the league going at him, he has to learn how to not get called for a lot of these fouls.
Let's turn to the rotation a little bit here, and you imagine that Walker will be the starting point guard when he returns. I agree with you that it would make sense to start Smart at the point and kind of move everyone down and start Grant Williams. I have this feeling that maybe Jeff Teague will still be the starter and that they'll still kind of want to just keep everyone in the roles, because like Teague can kind of play as a Kemba Walker light in some ways.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't shoot any threes, and was available for the minimum for a reason. He may even just be totally done, but he's a similar type of player. So maybe the thought is we want to keep everyone in the roles that they're going to be in. Once Kemba gets back, we'll start Teague, and then we can have Smart come in with the backup unit and run the point with them. But Teague will clearly be part of the rotation. That's what they signed him for, I'm sure. Who do you think starts at center?
So that's the hardest thing to predict, because Tice clearly earned and maintained that role last year, but there were some clear shortcomings that exposed themselves when he had to go up against Bam Adebayo and Serge Ibaka, where he just doesn't have the reach and the bounce to be able to play with these guys above the rim most of the time. And that's what Tristan Thompson should be able to bring to the table. And the Thompson signing, I think we'll get into the use of the MLE at some point here, but the Thompson signing is exciting from the perspective that they were kind of playing with their hands tied behind their back last year, and that they spent their one exception that they had on Enes Kanter, and Kanter just wasn't useful for them in important games. And now they get someone in Thompson who does all the stuff that Kanter does as far as grinding underneath, pick and roll, hard roll kind of stuff. And he actually is a pretty good defender who should at least be a good pick and roll defender, if not being able to switch and provide even more versatility. So I think the center position gets dramatically stronger for them, and that really helps take a lot of the blowout of losing Hayward. It's just that they at least are going to be a lot better near the rim than they were last year defensively, and probably offensively too. But so at the end of the day, I would keep Tice where he is, because I think Tice just proved to be such a good pick and roll defender last year that I think Thompson really has to take the job from him at this point, even if Thompson's probably better.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Thompson is better. And didn't Tice have some kind of a knee procedure as well?
He did, which was surprising. He had a scope to remove, I guess, some bone fragment or something like that was a loose body in his knee, that he had the same lateral meniscus tear that Kemba had. He had that back in 2018, had surgery on it. And pretty much every year he's had to scope it.
I thought he really struggled the year after that surgery. Do you agree with that kind of affected
he did.
him the next year?
I think that's part of why his leap last year seems so drastic. I think a part of it was just that he was healthy and he was just moving so much better. But he says that he's ready for training camp, and they said he would be ready for training camp, but I'm always dubious that that's really the case. But he says he's good to go, so it's very possible it was a very, very minimally invasive procedure, and he really is good to go.
Yeah, I mean, that was October 21st that he supposedly had this surgery, or at least when they released it. And so, he said the other day that he wouldn't have any restrictions in camp. I think whether Thompson or Tice is better, I think will really depend on the matchup, and whether Thompson, both of those guys, whether they can maintain their levels from last year. It was a bounce back year for Thompson after kind of 2 lost years before that. He's got a hamstring issue coming into camp, which might affect who the opening day starter is as well. And obviously Robert Williams will fit in there too. And it seems like Brad Stevens really likes using a lot of centers and having a lot of different looks, kind of the same way as Steve Kerr. I think, assuming everyone's healthy, to me it makes a little more sense to start Tristan Thompson, because, and maybe they'll just switch up the matchups as well, depending on who they're going against. But Thompson to me is just stronger, better post defender. So if you're going against a big brute, usually teams are more likely to start that kind of player than bring him off the bench. And then Tice can come in with the second unit. I think he gives a little bit more offense than Tristan Thompson as well. Thompson can kind of clean up on the offensive glass more than Tice does playing with the starters. They're both good screen setters, but I think Thompson is probably even better than Tice is there. Thompson can move his feet a little bit more defensively without fouling, which was a struggle for Tice. So I would probably start Thompson and then work in Tice and Williams off the bench, particularly if Tice is coming back from this surgery. And then you just close with whatever the best possible matchup is.
Yeah, I think a couple things I'll put in Thompson's camp is that one thing that the Celtics struggled with in the playoffs or the biggest thing they struggled with was just ball penetration into the paint. And they're a team that just doesn't pick and roll at all. They run lots of pick and roll, but they never hit the roll man on a hard roll to score. That's just something that they don't ever really do. And that's faded from most, very few teams in the league do it at this point. They were, I think, fourth last in usage in that kind of play last year, but the teams around them were all the top. It was like the Lakers and Houston and I think the Warriors. So,
they don't have a pick and pop threat either, which is another way you can get usage out of that.
Exactly. So that's where I'm going with this, is that Thompson is, I think, could be a really good pick and roll partner as a hard roller that you could throw over the top to. He can go up there and get it and finish with power, which is something that Tice doesn't do at all. Tice has been very effective for them as a playmaker in the pick and roll, where they'll have him do the snake and seal play that he does with Tatum, where he rolls into the middle of the paint and then just sets a box out screen. Yeah, so they insist it's called the Tice now, but it is legally speaking, it is the Gortat, of course. So he was really good with that, and he's also very good as a short rolling passer. That was something that most people just didn't really notice with them, but he actually was the best on the team in executing that stuff. So they would run a lot of stuff where with teams, if they wanted to try to trap the box high up at the free throw line, they would run a short pick and roll with him, and he could put the ball over his head or even spin around and go find a shooter that was wide open. And I'm not really sure how much Thompson's able to do that, but I'm assuming just Thompson playing in a team with just NBA caliber offensive players is going to open up a lot for him. So there's no clear pick on like who's the more effective pick and roll player, but if they're facing the same kind of issues that they were facing last year in the playoffs, where they desperately need somebody that they can get the ball to in the paint and he has the power and the athleticism to finish, I think Thompson is will make a massive difference in that regard. And that might be what kind of wins him the starting job at the end of the day. Because neither of these guys can pop anymore. Like Tice, he was a good popper the first couple years of his career. Last year, it went really poorly.
Yeah, he was pretty broke in the playoffs. I will respectfully disagree with your assessment of Thompson as an athlete. I think he's kind of more of a ground bound. What would Tom Heinsohn used to call those guys? Like they're like mashers or.
Oh yeah,
I can't remember what he would call a wide body or something like that. I think he's kind of more that type of guy at this point in his career. Now, what he can do a lot of is put the ball on the floor for a dribble or two and get into a short hook shot, with either hand, which
Tice cannot do at all.
Yeah. So he's got a little bit more of a floater guy. I actually think Tice is a better go up and get the ball in the air kind of guy. We'll see where Thompson is at as a playmaker, but he is a little more comfortable off of one or two dribbles, at least going towards the basket, even if he's not going to jump over anybody and finish. And then he's still a monster on the offensive glass too, which I think will be a nice element that this team hasn't had other than with Cantor, and Cantor obviously had so many defensive limitations. And then they got Rob Williams too. Do you think there's any possibility that Rob Williams is just better than both Tice and Thompson this year? Or is he just it's just too uncertain?
He is so much more talented than they are and can be so much more impactful than they are, that I think they would be willing to go with him if he can just show moderate improvement in his ability to read defense beyond the very first action, because he could defend a pick and roll just fine, and then everything would fall apart from there because he just couldn't continue to keep up with everything as it would change. And then on offense, he is amazing with the ball as long as he only needs to touch it for like 2 seconds, and anything more than 1 second, anything more than that, and things get really problematic. So the talent's through the roof with this guy. Like he can go up, he can make any kind of aerial play. He doesn't have a touch near the rim necessarily, but he's so athletic that he can release in so far above the rim that it doesn't really matter, and he can dunk so many dunks that shouldn't be dunkable. And then he's a really talented passer. Like he throws a lot of passes that you're like, how on earth did he make that pass? But then he also throws a lot of passes and you're like, why on earth did he make that pass? So it's just there is so much raw talent for them to mine out of him, and it's now at the point where he's entering his third season, and he's got to show he's got it at this point, because I wouldn't be shocked if they were willing to move on, or I guess they wouldn't decline the option. They would trade him as he's cheap enough, but He's got to show that he can make it this year. And last year he had some awesome games, and you're watching him, you're like, this guy's unreal. He had a game against San Antonio where he just single-handedly destroyed the Spurs. It was unbelievable. But he's been hurt the entire time. And the types of injuries he's had have been kind of like nagging injuries that weren't even supposed. It wasn't like he like rolled his ankle and was out for 2 months. It was like he had hip bursitis that was a hip bruise that was supposed to be out for a week, and then he just didn't come back for several months. And so he had a deep vein issue that was discovered when he was at Summer League when he first got drafted. So there's been a lot of issues that indicate that these might be chronic health issues that might derail his career, and hopefully he'll put it together because the dude is so much fun to watch, even if it's kind of a mess every single time.
Well, and the other problem is just that he got to be unplayable defensively, even with his talent. I mean, one of the big things he was supposed to be great at was getting out on the floor and moving his feet, and he was just getting traffic coned in any sort of a switch situation. And then, he's just not great for kind of the cat and mouse game of a conventional pick and roll defense either. I think he can be a solid depth piece. And of course, Grant Williams can move up to play the center position as well. I thought that's something that they should have gone to more in that Miami series, where that unit was going really well when they would have, I can't remember what game it was, where they had like a really nice comeback with him and took the lead, and then things fell apart. It might have actually been game 6 when they took him out and didn't go back to him. That I think they're going to at least have a lot of different looks at center. They don't necessarily have like that pure stretch guy. Maybe Williams can evolve into that. I think there is kind of more competence here with this group as long as the injuries don't hit, even with Walker out, where I think they can still be effective enough as long as Brown and Tatum can deliver as the top 2 guys. I think there is enough talent, and obviously the coaching of Brad Stevens around those guys to be still a solid, 4 or 5 seed level of team until Kemba Walker gets back.
Yeah, and just going back to that last point you were making, which was really cogent, that there's a reason why they went to Paul Millsap first with their MLE. Because they wanted someone who could be at least a 3-and-D at that 4-5 position that they could count on, that could be a rim protector and could handle brutes down low, but could also shoot the ball and provide some spacing. And so he chose Denver over their offer. They pivoted towards Thompson. They still got somebody good out of it, but it's clear that there's a missing piece of somebody out that can make a defense care about the 3-point line, that you actually trust in high pressure situations. That's like their big thing that they're missing right now.
All right. Any big strengths for this group that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet?
I don't know if this is a strength necessarily, but last year they had 3 guys that were top in the league in pick and roll scoring efficiency. So they had Kemba was number 2, Tatum was 8, and then Smart was number 10. And they were, I don't think there was any other team except for the Clippers that even had 2 guys in the top 20, let alone 3 guys in the top 10. Actually, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is number 20, and then Chris Paul was right at the top. But so, they always had this offense that was really predicated on side-to-side movement, dribble handoffs, that kind of stuff. And then in crunch time, Isaiah Thomas, Kyrie Irving would go to that high pick and roll game. And then last year, they really kind of narrowed the offense, kept it focused to being up high above the slots and running lots and lots of high pick and roll, lots of plays that would set up high pick and roll. And it worked really well, and they had a top 5 offense. And I guess I'm wondering, after what they saw in the playoffs, is that something that they continue to lean into? Because that's clearly a strength of theirs, and it's the play style that is obviously dominating around the league right now. So is that something that they continue to lean on, or do they need to diversify their offense a little bit more and have a more complicated playbook the way they had to in the past, because they didn't have the kind of high level talent that they do now?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the offense looks like, and Smart is another guy who might relish an opportunity with the ball in his hands a little bit more. I like that as a strength. That off the dribble 3-point shooting, that's the biggest thing that you have to point to. And just, I think their overall depth and competence, just to have, now Romeo Langford it sounds like he's not gonna be ready to start the season either. He's got a ways to go, but just another year of Grant Williams where he's not going to start the year 0 for 25 from 3. I think just the team having more confidence in him with Hayward gone as well, to just know that he's going to have an every night role and that he might even start, I think is going to be really good for them. And to have a few more options at center that they feel like they can rely on defensively is going to be useful. So I think the depth on this team is going to be better than it was last year. I think the weakness, the biggest thing I would have pointed to last year, number one, was just that I didn't feel that they had that absolute, real top 5 level of star that you need to win a championship. And does Jayson Tatum get there this year? Like, that's going to be a really interesting question when I do my top 10 players in the NBA ranking of where he's going to fall. And so if he's not going to be solidly in that top 10, realistically, this team probably isn't a championship contender, because it doesn't seem like Kemba Walker, is going to be a top 15 type of player any longer. So I think that's just that absolute high-end star power is a weakness when you're talking about the rarefied air this team wants to be in. I think they've shored up a little bit, just like the lack of physicality, because, they got destroyed by Bam last year. Giannis, they didn't really have anyone. I think with Grant Williams coming into his own and Tristan Thompson, I think they have enough beef now. Maybe not enough beef, but enough so that it's not a clear weakness any longer.
Yeah, it feels like they shored up most of the weaknesses that they had last year, which was just inherent that their bench was insanely thin because they used all their draft picks and they had to let go of a bunch of guys that were kind of mid-career guys. So that wasn't, that year was always going to be a transition year for the supporting cast. That clearly is going to shore up to a degree with player development and the signings that they made, but it's just that they lost that edge that they had with that wing depth, at that high level wing depth. Losing that, I feel like it's a much bigger loss than whatever gains that they get around the edges. And so that's why, unless Brown and Tatum are taking another big step, and Tatum is playing at the level he played at throughout the playoffs, where I guess usage might have definitely inflated his numbers a little bit, but he was putting up a 25-10-5 every single night. So if he's doing something comparable to that, then that probably makes up for the loss of Hayward. And especially if Smart, I think the biggest question on this team is probably Smart, actually, is he going to be the guy that he showed a lot of the time in the bubble, or is he going to go back to who he was in the regular season? Because his scoring and playmaking and foul drawing took this massive leap in the bubble.
Are you ready for some
predictions?
predictions?
Good leap, not massive.
You ready for some predictions there?
Not at all.
Well, that is too bad, I fear, because you have to go first, since Keith Smith went first on the last podcast that I did.
Oh, wow. Okay. What is 0.58 times 72?
Well, here, you can just give me the 82 your 82 game projection, and I'll be happy to translate that for you into 72.
Okay.
I have the spreadsheet here.
I think I still see them as a 50 win team. I think this team full strength is a 50 to 55 range, which is pretty close to where they were last year. But because of Kemba, his health, because Romeo Langford, someone who they really need for wing depth, is going to be out for so long, I'm going to give them the equivalent to a 48 or 49. I'll go with the equivalent to 49. So
that is,
which would make them a 60% team.
Yeah, that's 43 wins.
Okay.
This is surprising. I am actually higher on them than you. And last year, they were a top 5 offense and a top 5 defense. And they had the point differential of a 58 win team. They were on pace only for 55. So they actually were on pace to win 3 fewer games than expected. I don't think they'll be as good in the regular season this year as they were last year, with the loss of Hayward, who was important, although he missed time. And then Kemba didn't miss that much time. He missed a little bit in the bubble, but actually maybe he didn't. Now that I
Kemba, he barely. I think he didn't miss any of the regular season games in the bubble, but he was on a 20-minute restriction that was gradually increasing.
Right. Okay, yeah. Thanks for that recollection. So I think there are going to be a little bit harder hit with injuries this year. I think they're going to get more out of Thompson than they did out of Cantor last year. I think the depth problems are, maybe they're a little bit bigger because they won't have Walker for part of it. I think they're going to miss Brad Wanamaker, although maybe more in the playoffs than during the regular season, because I think Teague is just too small. He's not going to be able to, and he doesn't shoot it, so I think it's just going to be hard to play him.
But he doesn't travel when he dribbles the ball, so there's that.
That's true. Wanamaker did have a weird number of travels when he would
get 20 travels in the playoffs. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah. That said, though, I mean, he played 20 minutes a game, and he was a good player for them in the playoffs. I thought his shot really improved, and whatever. We don't need to talk about him too much. I did think it was.
No, he deserved. He earned this. He was a minimum player playing as like essentially the 6th or 7th man on a team that almost made the finals. He deserves a lot of credit for being able to step up. And he had that one game that always happens on those runs where he had like 15 points and basically saved the team in that game. So he definitely punched way above his weight. He deserves credit for that. But I think I do think
apparently not from the Celtics because they didn't. Apparently not from the Celtics. They didn't give him a qualifying offer. But from you and me, yeah, absolutely, we'll give him the credit. So I think I'm going to go. I think they'll be a little worse than last year in the regular season, but this is a team that pretty much always under Brad Stevens has punched a little bit above their weight, and I think they can get more out of Brown and Tatum this year. I think they can get a little bit more out of Smart this year. The loss of Walker for a little bit and Hayward for the whole season it's not as damaging for this team. We saw that when Hayward basically missed the entire playoffs, and they still were able to make it to the East Finals, and it looked pretty decent doing it because they have redundancies in terms of ball handling and creation, and I think Tatum and Brown are only going to take further steps forward this year. So I think I'm going to predict this team to play at a 53-win pace over an 82-game season, so call that 47 wins as my prediction. So I'm 4 games ahead of you, it sounds like, which is a surprise. Usually the local expert is more optimistic on the team than me.
Well, I'm trying to be a little bit bearish just because there was so much optimism coming from me on the last few years that I've done this that I want to tone it down a little bit. Well, especially because the standard is so high now, and they're no longer in a situation where they're making huge progress and they're getting back somebody that wasn't, like last year it was all, hey, they're going to finally have Gordon Hayward hopefully as a good player, and Kemba Walker is not going to ruin the locker room like Kyrie did, and that it worked out, and that's why they were so damn good last year. And because and I'm being very pessimistic or relatively pessimistic on the regular season record because of the Kemba injury and because of the loss of Hayward. But I do think that they have probably just as good of a shot at making the finals this year in a vacuum based on their own capability as they did last year.
So last year, you and I both actually predicted 48 wins. We were both way short. As I mentioned, they had the point differential of a 58-win team last year, and we're on pace to win 55, which was both of our best case scenarios for them. What do you see as the best case regular season scenario this year?
I mean, Tatum and Brown just take another huge step forward. Kemba comes back and he's fully healthy and things look great. And Smart's offensive dynamism that he showed a lot of in the bubble continues to carry over, and he's able to get 6 assists a game and draw 7 fouls a game or 7 free throws a game. If all that holds true, then they can be the equivalent of a 55 to 58 win team in the regular season and have a fight for one of the top seeds. That's definitely realistic. And I think for them at the end of the day, it's about the playoffs. And if all those things hold true, I still see them as really on even footing with the other top contenders in the East to have a shot to make the finals.
Yeah, I mean, I think more than ever in the East, it's going to depend on what the matchups are. And I think also it's going to depend a ton just on what the Brooklyn Nets look like. I mean, if KD is KD, and Kyrie makes it through healthy, as batshit crazy as he is. I mean, he played at a really high level last year when he wasn't hurt. Or if they make a trade too, as well for Harden. I mean, they're going to be a really, really good offensive team, and they could have the most talent in the Eastern Conference. I just have no idea what to expect for that. I can't wait. That Warriors Nets game on opening night is going to be awesome. I can't wait for that.
I mean, I can't wait for the Nets just because they could be like what like Atlanta wishes they were, which is they might literally average 130 points a game and then give up 128 points a game, and they still could win the championship that way. Yeah. Because I have no idea who in their starting lineup is supposed to be playing defense allegedly, but their offensive capability is like so ridiculously insane. Yeah.
So you were saying 58 win team. I think 58 wins would be 51 in the regular year. That's what I would have had as well. How about a worst case scenario for these guys? I mean, and of course, for those who don't listen to every episode, what we mean here is this isn't Jayson Tatum gets hurt on the first day. Just normal injuries that are expected. Obviously, with Walker expected to miss time, you price in that he could miss a lot of time. But for guys who aren't injured, we're not going to project that they're going to miss more than, just the normal number of maintenance type of game.
Yeah, well, I think a legitimate perspective would be, a possibility would be that Tatum does start dealing with injuries for the first time. He's barely missed any time in his career, and maybe that's something that happens. Jaylen Brown, he tends to get hurt in like freak accidents all the time, but then he manages to come back from it pretty quickly. But so, if those two guys start getting hit with the injury bug and they're missing chunks of 7 games here and there, that's where it could really see the record tank. So between that possibility, just the possibility that Tatum plateaus, Tatum has been on a historically meteoric rise over the last year and a half, and maybe he just kind of plateaus to where he was last year, which is when he's not on fire, he's just like a really good, well-rounded player, but he's not a superstar. And then that Jaylen Brown also plateaus, and he's still at second half of the year, by the time All-Star voting ended, when he found out that he wasn't an All-Star last year, he really went off on a tear and played at like a very clear All-Star level from there on out. So I'm pretty confident he'll probably be an All-Star this year, but of course, especially with KD coming into the conference, there might just be too many players that maybe he gets squeezed out again. But so either way, like, it's possible that both of those guys, they just kind of plateau and then they're dealing with injuries and they're just not really playing at that substantial of a level. And then Marcus Smart, for all the positives that there were in the playoffs, there were a ton of negatives of out of control play on both ends. Maybe with him and he's really the captain of the team at this point, and maybe he seizes that and he just plays too out of control, and more furniture gets tossed around and more tables get flipped, and the chemistry that they have that was really strong last year crumbles, which I'd be really shocked if any of that stuff happened. But it's possible that when they're not on championship pace, that a lot of the fights that can get smoothed over pretty easily in this locker room, that they don't smooth over, and there's a lot of kind of limping to the finish line kind of stuff happening.
Yeah, so I would say my worst case scenario would be 45 wins over a normal season, so 40 in this season. Is that about where you would be as well?
Yeah, that seems reasonable. They're too talented to fall below that.
Yeah, and Smart is a guy who's dealt with a lot of nagging injuries. He plays a very physical style, so he can easily miss time as well. But
he'll break something at some point in the year.
What'd you say? Yeah, he'll
break something at some point. Yeah, whether it's a picture frame or a bone, whatever it is, he'll break it.
All right, I was gonna get you out of here, but I'm glad we stuck around for that quip. But where can we follow your stuff before you go?
You can find me at The Athletic, Jared Weiss MBA on the tweet machines, and once a year on Dunc'd On.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward actually to reading your piece. I got it starred. We put it in our daily dunks that we do for our subscribers today, but I haven't actually had a chance to read it yet. So that's what I'm going to do when I'm actually, for the 5 minutes a day that I'm not recording a podcast, I'm going to read some more about the NBA. But thanks again for coming on. I do think, though, it's sad that we don't have a bet for this year. Maybe we can come up with something.
We can come up with something real quick.
Yeah. Maybe there will actually be a summer league for one of us to pay off the bet.
Well, you know what? I got to go in for you. Marcus Smart pull up 3-point percentage, which I should have looked it up before I said that. Let me find it, because that was one of the stats I was supposed to have written down, but it was like shockingly good last year. Well, it didn't make any sense why it was that good level.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we're going to have a disagreement on that, though. That might be the problem.
Well, because I mean, there's a very reasonable bet here, which is projected it's going to tank like crazy, and he's going to shoot 25% from 3 again, and you win the bet.
Well, how about this?
Neither of us feel compelled.
Do you want to do Jayson Tatum 40% 3-point shooting again?
Yeah. I'll
take the under, you take the over. I mean, this will be a fun one. We should do it every year until he shoots 45% 5 years in a row or something.
All right. Yeah, I'll do that. Where was he last year? He was 40.3 on 7 attempts. Yeah, I'll take the over. What the hell? I think I'm going to lose.
Yeah.
I'm doing it.
All right. I am salivating at that Momofuku Wagyu already.
This time we're sticking with the regular steak, not the $500. They bring the entire cow out for you to slaughter thing that we did last time.
It wasn't $500. It was like, it ended up being like $100 or something. I think something like,
no.
Like at least for my share of it.
Oh,
like,
yeah,
you also had to pay for your own, obviously.
Yeah, all I remember is I think I paid like $350 at night, and I've never come even remotely close to spending that much money on dinner before. So I think I canceled Netflix for like 3 months after that just to help ease the blow for a little bit. Not that I had any time or anything.
Yeah, well, it's starting to evoke a Pavlovian response now for me, where I just start salivating every time we do this podcast every year now. So
my mouth is literally watering right now, actually. So I'm just the idea of us being in Vegas eating an overpriced steak. It's so unrealistic, and so it brings me so much. What's the term for it? False hope. That's what I'm thinking of. It gives me so much false hope that society will be back to normal. We'll have Summer League next year. But hopefully we will be able to do it at some point.
Well, maybe, if not then, maybe the G League Showcase next December. Maybe that's when it'll be. You know, you can pitch to the Athletic that you really need to go see Carson Edwards in his third year with the main reg clause. Check in on how he's doing.
Seems like an easy sell. Well, it'll be Tremont Waters going for his third straight MVP that year.
Yeah, third straight year on a two-way. He and Taco Fall together.
They're gonna rewrite the two-way rules, just allow him to stay on the two-way the rest of his career.
All right, man.
They only get one more year, right?
I think you can be on it for. Let's see. Can you
get 3 years, right?
Years? Well, you can't have more than 3 years of experience. Marquise Chris was on a two-way last year for the Warriors for a time. So and he is in his 4 years. So 3 years of experience before the season, I think. But there might be. I'm not sure that you can be on a two-way with the same team for more than a couple of years. Don't worry. It's not like I'm supposed to be an expert in these things, or could actually look it up.
Now on Dunc'd on Prime, Nate Duncan guesses what the rules are.
All right, man. This is really fun. Thanks for coming on, and we'll be back on Sunday night. Actually, I might be running this on Sunday, so maybe I should say we'll be back on Monday night for Dunc'd on Prime. And in fact, this is going to be running. I should have said this. This is going to be running on regular Dunc'd On. So we should. I encourage you guys to sign up for Dunc'd on Prime, because we have roughly 67 season outlooks before the start of the season that we have to get through. So you're going to get your money's worth. We did a lot of awesome stuff like off-season grades and stuff. You can get all the archives as well. So it's a good reason to sign up for Dunc'd on Prime now, as we actually going to have a season here. How you? Well, the most drama-filled team in the NBA. Can we say that about the LA Clippers? Perhaps we should. And one of the people who will no doubt be blamed for creating that drama, although, as we know, he's just reporting on what's actually there, is Jovan Buha. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I've been better, but I'm doing well.
I mean, this has just been an absolute whirlwind for beat reporters. Poor Fred Katz. We just he's had all this stuff, and then John Wall gets traded yesterday, 2 days after we did the Wizards preview. Hopefully that's not coming with the Clippers. I mean, they're not going to be that mad at Paul George, right?
Oof. Those. Yeah, he sometimes puts his foot in his mouth.
I mean, it really does seem like. Do you think he was? And for those who missed his comments, he basically said we didn't make any adjustments over the course of the playoff series against the Nuggets, and he didn't want to be used like Ray Allen or JJ Redick coming off of pin downs, which, as Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer pointed out, I'm sure you're well aware of also, is not really accurate, that he actually ran way more pick and roll than he ever had last year. But do you think he understands that he's really taking a shot at Doc Rivers when he's saying that, or is he just kind of kicking back with Steven Jackson and just saying what's on his mind and not even realizing it?
I think he's aware. And to be honest, I think he has a point with some of that. I mean, I do think looking back on that series, and even in the playoffs, this was something that I reported after Doc, they mutually parted ways with him, which even kind of looking into that situation, there have been some stuff coming out on Doc's side that he didn't expect to be let go. So you kind of think maybe the team is framing it more as a mutual parting of ways than Doc was. But, there was a lack of adjustments throughout the playoffs, and I talked to Clippers people that were nervous about the Dallas series and felt that had Porzingis been healthy, they might have lost that series, or it would have gone 7 and down to the wire in a game 7. So I do think there's definitely some criticism on Doc and his lack of adjustments, overplaying Montrezl Harrell, relying too much on Reggie Jackson in that Dallas series. So he deserves the blame. But, as you pointed out, I don't think it was really on the way he used Paul George. I felt, a lot of the Paul George stuff was self-inflicted. And just, if you look at his shot profile, like one of the biggest differences from his top 3 finish, his third place finish in MVP in OKC versus last year was his free throw rate. He got to the free throw line a lot less and became more jump shot reliant. But so, I mean, I do. But the problem is this kind of falls into that narrative with PG that he never really takes accountability or responsibility for his poor play. And they're all, going back to OKC or Indiana, there had been excuses in certain instances. And I think that just kind of goes with that narrative. And that's what some people on Twitter were upset with. But, I think he has a point with some of it. But I think when talking about himself, I think some of that stuff was misguided and just, factually incorrect.
Well, and I think if you had to make a list of the reasons of why they lost to the Nuggets the way they did, I mean, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George just not playing well enough. As much as you want to blame Doc Rivers and Montrezl Harrell and all that stuff, I mean, those guys were a combined 8 out of 29 in the last game. I mean, missing open shots, not able to get good shots, looking really tired out there. I mean, that's the number one reason why they lost. I mean, they couldn't score against the Nuggets. That's not Doc Rivers' fault that shots aren't going in. In fact, they actually, per all the second spectrum data, were creating good shots throughout the series, and just particularly by the end didn't go in. So I mean, it does show a little bit of a lack of accountability, and that, of course, per your reporting, your piece that came out before these comments were released, was that that's a big problem that his teammates had with him last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that is going to be the central thing with the Clippers this season. A lot has been made with the preferential treatment stuff, and I've tried to contextualize it in both of the big chemistry stories I've done, in that, preferential treatment is a thing in the NBA. If you go locker room by locker room, you're going to see the all-star or the face of the franchise get some level of that. I think in this instance, it was more of the culture shift and the way it affected, their teammates. And it wasn't just that, and some, if you look at the Lakers, LeBron and AD are going to get their level of special treatment and whatever those things are. But exactly. those guys bought into it. Danny Green understood his role. JaVale McGee understood his role, down the list. All those guys bought into the culture, and everybody was fine with where they were in the pecking order and their roles and responsibilities. That was not the case with the Clippers. And there was too much of, resentment and jealousy and pettiness and why is this guy getting this and I'm not getting this? And, it wasn't just one guy. It wasn't two guys. It was 4, 5, 6 guys. And I think when you have that, it's kind of, miraculous that they were as good as they were. Top 5 offense, top 5 defense, should have made the conference finals at a minimum. This team, in spite of all that, was really, really good, and a legitimate championship contender. So for me, it's just going to be how they suss through some of these issues. Is it the Ty Lue change? Is it shuffling the bench as they did and bringing in someone like Serge Ibaka who has a relationship with Kawhi? But I mean, they still haven't plugged all their holes, and they still haven't added a true locker room leader. But to me, all this accountability stuff is what's going to determine this team and this team season.
It's funny that you mentioned LeBron. Anyone who thinks that LeBron James doesn't get special treatment is completely kidding themselves. But LeBron, at least, there are varying accounts on how genuine people find this, but he at least tries to do the teammate thing. He tries to be the leader. He tries to be socially involved with the rest of the team. And, a lot of people want to come and play with him. They view him as a great leader and someone that they could learn from. You don't see Kawhi Leonard, okay, I'm going to pull this young player aside and say, hey, here's what we need from you. Or if someone is unhappy with their role, for him to try to manage that person a little bit. If he's it seemed like Kawhi was moving to LA to kind of just get everything that he'd ever wanted, whether that was not talking to the media, whether it's, this thing where he's by himself kicking female staffers out of the locker room that you reported on, or anything else. He wanted to do things exactly his way, and he didn't want to have to do any of the stuff that he didn't want to do because he's a very private person. And it seems like that doesn't work from your best player in the end, unless you have Greg Popovich or Tony Parker or Tim Duncan or Kyle Lowry and Marc Gasol there. There wasn't that guy last year. And I think, would you agree with me that ended up not really working out?
Yeah, and that was something I've been told, throughout the season. That was in the first piece, and then this most recent one. Like, I think there would have been a greater level of acceptance to some of the concessions and the perks and the benefits had teammates felt Kawhi and PG had a relationship and a rapport with them. What one person told me was like, there was times during the season where those guys were out, right? Like, PG missed the first 10 games, ended up missing, 20 plus games. Kawhi was doing, the injury management protocol and resting on back-to-backs. Like, those times when they're just sitting there on the bench, like, around their teammates or in the locker room, like, not having to warm up and stretch and get focused and get into the game, like, that's when you could be, just shooting the breeze with guys and getting to know them and asking them about their background or whatever, and just kind of building that rapport that was just never there. So I don't think it wasn't like this super toxic, this wasn't a Kobe Shaq, early 2000s type dynamic. Like, nobody on this team necessarily like hated each other, but it just was a lot of like, we're colleagues. We're not really friends. We don't really have a relationship out of this. So I think they got along fine, like on the court for the most part. But if you look at the teams that made the conference finals, I mean, the Lakers clearly had really good chemistry. The Nuggets, the Celtics, the Heat. Like, I thought one thing that kind of showed maybe the difference between, like, let's say the Celtics versus the Clippers was Celtics had that, instance after the Heat, one of their losses to the Heat, where, there's shouting in the locker room, everyone came out and talked about it. Everyone that spoke to the media, like, addressed it, admitted that happened. And then the next day, they were all out at the pool and filming. That was, I think, Marcus Smart and Enes Kanter wrestling each other. And, like, they kind of played into it and admitted that it was true. And then kind of came out and showed, like, we're still teammates. Like, with the Clippers, it was a lot of, denial and nothing's wrong and that's fake news and this and that. And then the first thing, as I have in the story, they lose Game 7 and Lou Williams, Doc, and PG all come out and say chemistry was an issue, trust was an issue, like we weren't on the same page. And it's just like, I think just the way they handled some of these things also was an issue with just not accepting and taking that accountability of, hey, we do have some issues that we got to work through and kind of figure out. And said they denied it, and then eventually it has come out.
Yeah, and certainly I've made this argument before that we in the media can tend to overrate this inside baseball kind of stuff at times to where, because we have access, you more so than me, being the beat reporter traveling with them all season. And so that's the stuff that we know that the public can't see by watching the games. And so just to like provide value that we can provide, we maybe tend to overrate those things just because that's what we know that the public doesn't. But I think in this case, the way that they had this lack of chemistry in the reporting very much ties in with how they lost, right? And even what PG said of like not being able to make the adjustments, this team, whether it's Doc Rivers, whether it's Kawhi, PG, Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell, they didn't have the ability to have the hard conversations to say, all right, Montrezl Harrell, you're not going to play, to say, all right, you didn't make this rotation, I'm holding you accountable, or to Doc Rivers to adjust the rotation, or to just be able to go up to your teammates and say, hey, you need to play better. This is what we're doing isn't working. We have to improve this. If you don't have any kind of personal equity with someone at all, you don't feel comfortable saying those things to someone, and you don't feel comfortable being told those things to someone. And I think that the way that they imploded, where it started snowballing and they just couldn't find anything to turn it around, very much ties in with the reporting of what the interpersonal dynamics were like.
I mean, I think you just described it perfectly.
Well, thank you. So now to move to a different subject, though, these guys, despite all this, they lost. There's going to be a bigger spotlight on all of this, but they got completely fucked by the bubble and guys getting COVID and Patrick Beverley getting injured. I think he was probably one of the guys that they were referring to of like when the reporting came out that there are guys who weren't in shape to play the type of minutes they needed to play. And, Beverley, that he keeps himself in good shape, but he's coming off an injury. That's not his fault. And Lou Williams and Harrell and like all these guys just weren't playing at the level that we expected them to play at. And Kawhi, then I think he wore down because they had to try to have him guard Luka Doncic and had to have him guard Jamal Murray. And then he didn't have the energy for offense to do that, 43 minutes a game. compared to what he had to do in Toronto, where he didn't have to take on that role. So these guys, I mean, they were still pretty darn good. Is it an overreaction to the bubble if you're going to say that, hey, these guys aren't one of the championship favorites this year? Or is the bubble really more representative than the regular season was?
I think it's an overreaction. I still have them. I know we're going to get into projected record and season outcomes and stuff. I still have them as the second best team in the West, and it wouldn't surprise me if they ended up being the 1 seed. I do think with the Lakers being the reigning champions and coming off the offseason that they just had, you probably have to put them as the favorites, at least in the West. But I'd put the Clippers right behind them, and then looking at the East, like I guess maybe you put Milwaukee ahead of them, or maybe they're neck and neck. But to me, they're right there as like the second or third best team in the NBA right now. And I think to your point, I think we do overrate some of this stuff. And to me, it's like, I don't really see how it can get worse. I mean, I guess technically it can get worse. And there still are again, they haven't solved every issue that they had. And a lot of it seems to be, on Ty Lue's shoulders. But this was a team that, the starting lineup, which is going to be returning, had a plus 22.9 net rating in 147 minutes. That was the second best net rating in the NBA of any lineup that played 100 or more minutes. So that starting lineup, was one of the best, if not arguably the second best lineup in the NBA last season. And again, 147 minutes, not a big sample size. That dropped to plus 9.6 in 77 playoff minutes, which is still obviously a really good number. So yeah, I think having that core, starting group, they're going to play, 15 to 20 minutes a night together. And then now bringing in Serge Ibaka, Luke Kennard, Nicholas Batum, still having Lou Williams. I think looking at that top 8, top 9, like that's as good as I would say almost any top 8 or 9 in the league. And I think you're going to see some differences in Ty Lue and his rotations and stuff. So I do think they have that foundation of, a really, really good, still have Kawhi. Like they have 2 all-star, all NBA level guys. Still have a deep bench.
Do they?
Well, I mean that's also the other thing. Like we don't know.
That's the biggest question about this team to me.
Yeah, and I think to your point, one of the bigger differences between the regular season and the bubble was this. In the regular season, Kawhi and PG together on the floor had a plus 13.2 net rating. In the playoffs, that dropped to plus 1.1, and that is a huge difference, especially with how many more minutes they were playing in the playoffs. So, that partnership was not as effective in, you saw some of those big runs that happened against them in the Denver series with both guys on the floor. So that's going to be, that's something, though, I don't think is necessarily indicative of, I think it was a lot of the things you talked about, some guys not wanting to be there, guys being out of shape, just the team kind of snowballing with some of the chemistry stuff. But I think, we focused a lot on the chemistry stuff, but I think the injuries last year kind of also went, under discussed, where they only had 11 games last year where they had the top 9 of their rotation available. And I know there's some noise with that because not every team's going to be healthy throughout the season, but they were 10-1 in those games. And they tied the Warriors, who had the worst record in the league, for the most starting lineups used. And this one I thought was really interesting. This was something I used earlier in a story in the bubble. Giannis, LeBron, AD, and Chris Middleton combined to miss 34 games. So those are the top 2 players on the top 2 teams in the league. Yeah. Kawhi and PG missed 39 games. So they missed 5 more games collectively than the top 4 guys on the top 2 teams in the league. And I think that was kind of the difference if you look at the records between the Clippers and the Bucks and the Lakers. Like if the Clippers had the health of the Lakers and the Bucks, I think they would have had the same record or the same net rating or it would have been close. So I do think this team has a slightly better bench, at least on the top end of the bench. I think they have a more modern coach in Ty Lue, and I do think entering next year they should be as good, if not slightly better.
Well, so what changes do you anticipate that Lue is going to make compared to what Doc Rivers was doing?
So every coach comes out and says that they're going to play faster. That's like the go-to thing for every new hiring. We're going to play with more pace, more space. But if you actually look at Ty Lue's track record in Cleveland, I believe they went from 28th in pace his first season to 16th to 8th. And I know there were some personnel changes there. Kyrie Irving ended up leaving. It kind of shifted more around LeBron. But, if they were top 5 in 3-point rate in all 3 seasons. They did play faster. And I think Doc's refusal to embrace threes. I asked him about it multiple times over the past 2 seasons. Like, I think in both years they were top 10 in 3-point percentage, but they were bottom 12 in 3-point attempts per 100 possessions. And it was like, why aren't you guys shooting more threes? And Doc was really a coach who believes in empowering his guys and playing into their strengths. And for this team, especially last year, there's a lot of mid-range jumpers. Kawhi is one of the best in the league at that. Lou Williams, Paul George, so it was a very mid-range heavy attack. But they were, I think, 7th in 3-point percentage, and I think that's going to be one thing that Ty is going to have to shift. Is yes, I think you want Kawhi taking mid-range jumpers. That shot is essentially unstoppable when he's making it. But the other guys, like, you want to see Paul George even taking more threes. You want to see Lou Williams, Pat Beverly, now Luke Kennard. Like, those guys should have the green light to be taking 4 to 5 threes a night. And I think if you can juice that up a little bit, this team will have better spacing, a more modern offense, and they're already the second best offense in the league. But I think they have the chance to be the first if they do take that step, because if you look at their shot profile, like, it was kind of inefficient. It was a lot. They were one of the highest teams in mid-range jumpers. So not great. They don't have a lot of north-south guys. They don't have a lot of athleticism offensively. So I do think that's something to watch. Is just how Lue spaces the floor, playing some Serge Ibaka at the 5, obviously going smaller a bit, maybe with Marcus Morris at the 5. Like, I do think there are things he can toy with that Doc Rivers just wasn't going to do or do consistently.
Well, and one of the things that struck me too was when they tried to get Kawhi Leonard going in the post in the Denver series, they just double teamed him, and the Clippers didn't make him pay, in part due to the lack of spacing. You could also just blame the lack of continuity, just the overall lack of passing on this team as well. I mean, there are not many times where guys are just throwing great passes to people for layups or great dimes to the weak side for this team. And so, that's something that I'm not sure Ty Lue can fix all on his own, but his history in Cleveland was he goes for more offense when the chips are down and more shooting when the chips are down. And that's probably something that this team could really use. And he also employed switching defenses a lot more. I think there was some of the personnel that they have. Ibaka at center can do that at least late in the clock. They've got Batum now as well. They've got a lot of size that they can throw out there with this group if Paul George is going to be the 2. So I think that's something that they could go for as well, particularly if they're not going up against Denver, which was not a great matchup for them with Jokic, obviously. So explain this to me. Why did they acquire Luke Kennard? What kind of a role is he going to have for these guys?
I think they view they view all 3 of their additions as upgrades over their predecessors. I think you could make the case, I think most people would, that Serge Ibaka is an upgrade over Montrezl Harrell.
I agree.
And, it gives them, rim protection, defensive versatility, but then, the other end gives them that stretch and really, not, talked about enough. He's coming off a career best scoring season, averaged 15.4 points a game, which is the most he's ever averaged. So Serge, if anything, is actually, maybe even better offensively than defensively, or it's a lot closer than it was earlier in his career. Then Luke, I think, is replacing Landry Shamet and what they're different in I think Landry is a much better off-ball mover. I do think he's a better shooter, even though their career numbers are actually identical. But Luke is going to provide, like, the Clippers wanted Landry to handle the ball more, and that was something they talked about last preseason of, Landry might end up being the backup point guard, and they wanted him to
he did some of that in college, actually. Like, I think it was kind of a surprise with the Sixers when he moved into this JJ Redick role immediately.
Exactly, yeah. So that was the way he was billed as kind of a combo, a guy who could handle the ball, shoot it, and then, Philly basically turned him into a JJ Redick clone, which is, Doc loves that, type of player, so he used him in the same way. But it was something that Landry talked about. I had a story in the beginning of the season of Landry talking about wanting to play point guard more, but that never materialized for various reasons. I think the Clippers pulled the plug on it pretty early, and I think that is another thing you can maybe put on Doc is, whereas some coaches will develop younger players, even kind of through the growing pains, Doc has always been someone who, and we saw it with Zubats too, where if he'd get in foul trouble or just wasn't having that good of a night, he'd all of a sudden get benched in the second half or like the last 15 minutes of the game, where some coaches would put the guy back in and just have him play through that. So with Landry, that just didn't work, the point guard experiment. But I do think Luke is going to get those reps. Luke is someone that, was playing in Detroit, so I don't know how many people were actually watching him, but, averaged 15, 4 and 4 last year, has become a good 3-point shooter. He can handle the ball. He can play make a bit. So I kind of view him as the co-lead of the second unit with Lou Williams. Reggie Jackson is back. I was kind of surprised by that, honestly, with his performance in the playoffs, but I view him more as like an off-ball shooter. I don't think you want the ball in his hands. I don't think you want him making decisions. So I do view they're probably going to go with a Reggie, Lou, Luke, triumvirate there with the three guys, but I do expect Lou and Luke to be the primary ball handlers of the second unit. And I think he gives you an interesting look where like maybe you can close games with him, depending on the matchup, where you're just going with this huge lineup where you have now this 6'5" point guard, and you could put a PG or Kawhi on a point guard and hide Luke on a wing. It depends on the personnel, but I do think he gives you a different wrinkle that they didn't have last season. So I expect, I think there's a chance maybe he even leads the bench in minutes, as they look to rest Lou a little bit, Serge Ibaka a little bit, keep those guys fresh for the playoffs. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if they put more of that, 27, 28, 29 minute a game load on Luke. Now he has some knee issues and that's something I think to watch here is, I thought it was an interesting trade that Detroit gave up 4 second-round picks to get off of him. I know clearly they didn't want to pay him, and maybe there was some concern with his knees, but that was, to me, like a little bit of a red flag of why are they willing to give up so much to get off this guy. So that's the thing I think to watch with him, but I do expect him to have a big role and clearly be the 7th or 8th guy in this rotation.
Yeah, and now Detroit did get the 19th pick in that trade eventually as well. But yeah, the 4 second-rounders, it seemed like they actually really valued getting Rodney Magruder just so they could stretch him, and then they didn't even end up having to stretch him in the end. But the Kennard thing to me is interesting. I think in the regular season, it's great. They can use another ball handler. He's a good passer and shooter. I know Shamet struggled defensively in the playoffs last year, but I expect Kennard to be even worse. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you can play Kennard and Lou Williams together. That's probably too bad of a defensive backcourt for the regular season, not to mention the playoffs. It did sort of arouse my spidey sense a little bit on maybe this means that Lou Williams is not long for this team. Or maybe it just means that they needed this backup initiator for the future and they can extend Luke Kennard and Lou Williams will just, his contract will just expire after this year and he can be a longer term piece as an initiator for this group going forward beyond this year. Maybe that's part of it too, but I still have major concerns about Kennard defensively in the playoffs. And I think once you get into the second, third round of the playoffs, he's going to have to have his minutes and matchups monitored very carefully.
I think you hit on something there with Lou. There has been a lot of smoke with this team in terms of trading Lou or Pat. I expected I expected Montrez to be gone. I was not surprised by that, but I also expected one of those two guys to be traded. And I do think if this team makes a move before the trade deadline, whatever that move is, I would expect one, if not both, to be involved in that. A popular thing that's been thrown out on Twitter is Lou for George Hill. And I think the Clippers have to include something else to make the salary match. But I think that's an interesting one because, in theory, if you did that trade, now your bench makes a little bit more sense. You constantly have a 3-and-D point guard on the court, whether it's Pat Beverly or George Hill. George can take that defensive assignment that Luke Kennard can't take. So I do think Luke is... If it's not this season, it's moving forward. He is Lou insurance. He can be the lead initiator or co-initiator for a second unit offense, and I think that's the way they're viewing him as someone they want to re-sign, bring back in, and be part of this core moving forward.
Real quickly here, because we don't have to make this the Luke Kennard podcast. But what do you think the chances are they extend him right now?
I think it's relatively low. My guess is that he probably wants more than they're willing to give him at this point.
That might be why he is a Clipper right now to begin with, because Detroit didn't want to give him that.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the way the front office has operated, they have rarely overpaid guys in the last 3 years. I think the Marcus Morris contract could get a little ugly in a couple of years, but that was, as John Hollinger wrote, like that that's the
bird rights
the
trap.
Bird rights trap. And so like you kind of had to keep Marcus. If you lost Marcus, I mean, I think that this team would have had a big hit to their title odds. So they had to retain him. But aside from that, which again their hand was kind of forced into that. I think if you look at their track record, they have not overpaid guys. They have tended to get guys at market or below market value. And so I don't know what Kennard's value is. Like I feel like something, I don't know, 3 years, 24 million, somewhere in that range. Like I think maybe they do that.
And he's not going to take that.
And he's not going to take that. And he's going to want double digit. So that's where I think there's probably a gap on what he wants versus what they want. And so I would suspect they probably just play the season out, see how his knees hold up, see how he fits, and then just go into restricted free agency and see what he gets.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good players on the free agent market next year. So I think that's probably just guys just don't take extensions who have played at all, to be less than $10 million a year. And I wouldn't want to commit that right now. If I were the Clippers, I'd rather maintain flexibility for next year. So any other kind of playing time lineup issues that Ty Lue is going to have to sort out here that we haven't talked about yet?
I think one thing that I'm interested in is Kawhi and or PG playing more at the 4. I think if you just look at the way the league has trended and some of the best teams in the league play their wings up at the 4, and I guess Marcus technically qualifies as that, but from what I had heard last season, Kawhi and PG were reluctant to play up, and that's why they ended up being the starting 2 and 3 rather than 3 and 4. So I do think if they can, and I think that kind of goes into some of the treatment stuff. Like I think there was a reluctance. Like Paul didn't want to play the 4 in Indiana either. So this has been kind of a trend with him. But I do think if those guys are willing to embrace that and play a little bit more at the 4, that is something that could unlock a just different version of the offense. Because I thought you saw that in the playoffs when they would go small, and it was for 2-minute stretch, 3-minute stretch, like they were basically impossible to guard. Like that's why.
Oh yeah, the Morris at center units, particularly in the Dallas series.
Even Jermichael, like when they'd go Jermichael at the 5 and then Kawhi at the 4, like that was really tough to guard. And all of a sudden he had driving lanes, and that was something that going with Zoo or Trez at the 5. Or going with more traditional lineups, like they didn't have that spacing and they didn't have those driving lanes. And again, this team, if we're looking at one of their weaknesses, like they don't have a lot of north-south guys. It's a lot of east to west. It's a lot of just kind of, I'm going to dance with you and then try to create a shot on the perimeter. It's not a lot of guys who can get to the rim. So they need spacing. Spacing is really important for this team, especially with also just not having playmakers and guys, really good passers. Like spacing is more important for their driving lanes. So I do think Ty embracing some of that, Serge is going to help with that, of course, as a good 3-point shooter. But going with smaller lineups, I think, is something I'm really intrigued by, and I think could unlock some different things for this team.
Who's going to start at center?
Ivica Zubac. As Hollinger, your podcast partner and my colleague, has written now multiple times, all-in-one metrics painted Zoo as like a top 15, top 20 center this season. And I know the casual fan listening might not think of him that way, but if you look at a lot of his key metrics, he's on par with guys like Rudy Gobert. Like he and Rudy, and I'm not saying he is Rudy Gobert or is ever going to be on that level, but he is objectively a very good screener. He's a good finisher at the rim. He's a good rim protector, and he's a really good rebounder. And I think those strengths and a guy who's only 23, are things you want to develop and continue. And I think you saw it in the bubble. Like he played a lot better, was putting up double doubles, and the second Trez came back, Doc started to go away from that. So I think if I'm the Clippers and I'm Ty Lue, I'm saying, Zoo, you're a starting center of the future. We still have you locked up a few more years. Like here are 24 to 26 minutes a night that you're getting every night, and let's see what you do with it. I think if it was Doc still coaching the team, maybe he would have gone to Serge, because you probably couldn't make that argument. Like Serge is better. I think he's their closing center, but I do think Zoo is going to be the center to start games and maybe even close depending on the matchups.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Ibaka to me with his defensive versatility and shooting, is maybe just a little bit better of a fit. But, I think there are some matchups where Zubac would make sense. I'm not sure how great a post defender Serge Ibaka is. So going against AD or Nikola Jokic, that might be more of a matchup for Zubats. Although, I mean, it's tough for like these young centers sometimes. Like, part of why Doc stopped playing him was he just had a few times where he would just like fumble away passes under the rim or like just couldn't finish, which is atypical. He usually finishes pretty well, but he struggled to finish at times in that Denver series or getting stripped down low. And then it seemed like everyone lost confidence in him immediately and, they never went back to him. And then Nick Batum, how does he fit into this group?
So I think he's the Rodney Magruder upgrade, and I think expectations need to be tempered with him. If you look at how bad he was last season,
he's lost some weight, hasn't he?
Yeah. So I think
because he looked fat last year, I thought.
I think he's in better shape, and to me, he's a guy who can raise this team's ceiling. Because again, I think you look at the top 8. Which would be the starters plus Ibaka, Lue, and Luke. To me, that is better than last season's top 8. But, I think 1 through maybe like 11 or 1 through 12, this team probably isn't as deep as last season, in my opinion. But the guy I think that changes that is Nicholas Batum. And again, you're not expecting Portland, the Portland version of him or even like early Charlotte. But if you look at like 27-18 and 2018-19, like if you could get that guy or even 80% of that guy, that's a decent ninth guy. It's someone who can play multiple positions. And I think with him, where he's going to help is offensively with just his playmaking and his ball handling. And, I went back and watched a decent amount of film on his offensive stuff and his defensive stuff. And I think just him being another ball handler, another guy out there, especially with that second unit, or even playing alongside Kawhi or PG and being, because this team, again, they don't have a traditional point guard. They don't have that floor general that's going to micromanage. So you need ball handling and playmaking from other positions. And that's where I think, Nick as a 3 or a 4 can, provide some funky, kind of wrinkles to, second units and maybe like mid third quarter units. Like I think he has, he has stuff that this team needs. And I think, defensively, he's probably better defensively than offensively at this point, and a guy who could defend multiple positions, not good defending the pick and roll, and if you screen him, he's going to die in some of those screens, but is someone that with that length can still bother guys on the wing a bit. So I think, taking a gamble on him as a 9th guy, like, I thought it was a smart move, and clearly it was a move they were waiting on, because there was kind of this weird gap where their moves had been reported, but they waited on them, once the free agency period officially started. They waited for a few days, and then, they didn't fill in the back end of their roster, and it seemed like they were waiting for something, and that clearly was Nick Batum to, for the Gordon Hayward situation to be resolved, and then for him to be a free agent. So I think he again, if you're expecting him to be a 9th guy on this team, that's like more realistic expectations. I don't expect him to be like a starter level or 6-man level. But I think if you just ask him to be a additional secondary playmaker and ball handler and a decent defender, he can probably provide that.
Yeah, and I don't know if he's going to work out. He may just be done. But the theory of him, as you mentioned, is one that makes a lot of sense, because that's a big weakness of this team still to me, is just their overall passing unselfishness, those quick ping passes around the perimeter. And he at least has some size. He doesn't have a target on his back defensively. I don't know that he's going to be good, but at least he's not someone where like other teams are licking their chops. Like he at least looks the part defensively, which is kind of what it has to be sometimes as well. If you're just like, this guy's got pretty good size, he's got some length. Let's just let's go at Lou Williams instead here. Any of the give me just like 20-second status report on some of the young guys who are left over from last year. There's Kai Bowman, there's Terrence Mann, they drafted Danny Latoru, number 33, and Viano Kamengele. Of those guys, do you see any of them emerging into any kind of a role at all?
To be honest, not really this season. The Clippers front office has been rightfully lauded for, just the way they've operated the last 3+ years, and of course landing Kawhi Leonard and trading for Paul George, but a lot of the moves are on the margins, and trading away Blake Griffin, trading away Tobias Harris, like making difficult decisions that were for the best for the franchise. The drafting, though, has been kind of a bit of a crapshoot. And I think, drafting Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was obviously, the right pick and ended up being a steal at number 12, even though they technically traded for him. But, they were talking with Charlotte about that. But then you look at some of the, Jerome Robinson. Fee was someone that they drafted higher than DraftNix had him. Now going to Daniel Oturu was someone that they drafted higher than DraftNix had him. And I wonder, like, they've tended to be safer with their draft picks and drafting guys, 21, 22, 23. And I just don't know. Like, those guys are supposed to be NBA ready, but they clearly haven't been. Terrence had a few nice stretches with the team last season, but
I still have some hope for him.
I think he could be a rotation player.
Pick, he was fine.
I think these guys can grow into rotation players. It's just they were billed as like ready now guys, and then when you saw them, they clearly weren't ready now. So that's where, for me, I've just wondered why they haven't taken more gambles on, if you're going to be a good team that's not really playing your young guys, might as well grab like a 19 or 20-year-old just to stash and try to develop versus like a 22-year-old who you think is ready but isn't ready. And I think the best example of that was Jerome Robinson. But I think, if I had to guess, it would be Terrence or Fee. I think that, Fee having Ibaka is going to be huge for him, because Fee is a 3-and-D big, and having Ibaka, one of the better, current 3-and-D role-playing bigs in the league as a mentor, I think is going to be huge for Fee. Terrence, for him, it's just his 3-pointer. Teams do not respect his shot at all. But he is this interesting 6'7" point guard who can get out in transition. He's one of the guys. He might be the best on the team top 2 or 3 in getting to the rim. He's just still not that good of a finisher. Again, teams are just playing off of him because they don't respect the shot. So if I had to pick, I would probably pick Terrence. But as of now, I'm expecting those guys to maybe get some opportunities, but to probably end up on the outside looking in on the rotation.
Yeah, that would be my assessment as well, though. Someone like Oturu, we haven't seen any of him at all in Summer League or anything. Who knows? He could come in and kill it. I think other than just the Patrick Patterson slot of like one more versatile guy as a backup 4, this rotation does seem like relatively filled to me, and they'll always, of course, be competitive on the buyout market. They will have a little bit to contend with the hard cap, but that should be navigable with cash and dumping some players around the trade deadline, you would think. Any other big strengths for this team that we haven't talked about yet?
I think, again, like how dominant they were on both ends. I think most people focused on what they could have been defensively, and I think that was undone a bit in the playoffs, and they really struggled defensively. But offensively, this was the second best offense in the league, and to me, with the changes that they made, I think improving their spacing, I think Serge versus Trez as a passer, I think is an upgrade too. Like, Serge is a ball mover, a guy who can make quick decisions, I think that wasn't one of Trez's strengths. He was obviously a really good scorer, really efficient scorer, but he tended to hold the ball a bit, and it was like when he got the ball, he was looking to shoot, not to pass. So
Serge, the ball will get out of his hands quickly. Now, whether that's going to be a pass or a jump shot is some question. He's improved since, I think the 2017 playoffs, his first year in Toronto. He really struggled making decisions off the short roll, but I think he's gotten better there. He's not a plus, but I think, I buy what you're saying about him being better than Harrell in that respect.
I think the biggest thing for me, though, the biggest improvement maybe from, or I don't know if it's the biggest, but it would be up there for me from last season to this season, is the addition of Serge defensively, just as a trustworthy backline defender and rim protector. And again, I know he's not the same guy he was in Oklahoma City. I know he's not the same guy he was early in Toronto, but he still was top 15 in defensive field goal percentage allowed at the rim. Ivica Zubac was top 10. So now I think you have, again, they might go to smaller lineups where maybe it's a Marcus Morris or a Patrick Patterson at the 5 just to kind of space the floor. But I think now you have 48 minutes of a good rim protector on the floor at all times. and they didn't have that last season, and we saw that really hurt them in the playoffs. Even JaMychal Green, who I think is a solid defender, is a bit switchable, mobile, like he can do different things. He was not really a rim protector. Obviously Montrezl Harrell wasn't. So I think upgrading that spot to Ibaka, while again he's not the elite defensive player of the year caliber guy he used to be, I think that is a giant jump for them, and something that I think will help with some of the defensive issues that they had.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have a lot of size right now and versatility with Paul George as your 2. Beverly hopefully will be more healthy than he was. And then even at the end of the clock, to Ibaka's mobility to get out on the floor. I think this is a team that has the capability of being the best playoff defense. I would still put the Lakers up there because AD was just absolutely ridiculous in the playoffs last year defensively. But I think the Clippers can get close to there. And when I think about just the strengths of this team, I think now, last year you could make the argument, well, yeah, Kawhi and PG didn't play that well, but what they were really undone by was the Harrell thing, and that there just weren't enough players that they could trust in the rotation at the end. And this is a theme I would carry on to a lot of teams, is just between the Lakers, the Bucks, the Nets, the Clippers. I think, those are the teams that have the most star power in theory. We'll see about the Nets. All of those teams to me have done enough that if their stars deliver, they should be able to win it, right? Like, it really, to me, what this Clippers season comes down to, and a lot of these other teams too, is just whose stars are going to be better at the end of the day. I don't think there's a huge difference between the Lakers supporting cast and the Clippers supporting cast. I might actually like the Clippers supporting cast better than the Lakers, particularly because Montrezl Harrell is now a Laker. My big question is just, how good are Kawhi, and even Kawhi I have more faith in probably than PG, because Kawhi played great until just the last 3 games of the playoffs last year, and PG kind of struggled. They just need Paul George to be a top 10 player in the NBA. If he's that, then this team is as good as anybody. If he's, the 20th best player, struggling to make the all-star team type of guy, then the Clippers might be sunk no matter who they added in the offseason. And
I do think that PG's struggles were a little bit overblown, like definitely in the Denver, the second half of the Denver series, and at definitely in the Dallas series at times, and so I guess you could just say the whole postseason. But he was just so up and down last year that on a per minute basis, his numbers were actually almost identical in the regular season to his regular season in OKC in 18-19. Like, they were a little bit worse, but they weren't far off. And I think the way people talked about him in the regular season, was like he was playing the way he played in the playoffs, and that hadn't yet happened. So it was almost a self-fulfilling prophecy with him, where I do think he can be a little bit sensitive to that stuff. And he even admitted that in the bubble, that he was, reading what people were saying and checking social media, and like that kind of got into his head a little bit. So I think that was definitely a factor in the playoffs, but I think he is closer to that level than people think. But there was these wild swings with him at times during the season, and he started off really hot, and he was averaging like almost 30 points a game the first few games as a Clipper, and then would go through stretches where I think I wrote something about this, where like the last 20 games or so, he only had like 2 games, 2 30-point games over the last 20 something games of the season, and it was just like he was so up and down. So I think him getting back to just being that consistent guy, I think to your point, is what they really need, and that is going to be their ceiling. Because when you look at the Lakers, the thing is, even if PG's a top 10 guy, it might not matter, because the Lakers might have 2 top 3 guys, 2 top 4 guys. So PG really has to get back to that. Otherwise, I agree with you. Even if Kawhi is the best player in the world, if PG's top 20, top 25, it might not matter against a team like the Lakers, where you have 2 top 3, top 5 guys. Yeah, George's season was so interesting. I mean, his three-point shooting was nasty last year. 41% on 9.7 three-point attempts per 36 minutes. I mean, that's awesome. Now, he's only 46% from 2, and you mentioned the decline in free throw rate as well. And that's something that they're going to be worse at this year, with Lou Williams maybe having his role reduced, and Harrell, who is a huge free throw guy. They may not get to the line quite as much as they did last year. And that was really the only thing that they were elite at. Everything else, they were 9th or worse offensively in the 4 factors, except for that. If Zubats plays more, they might be a little bit better on the offensive glass
this year, but obviously that's not a major component. Any other weaknesses that you would be concerned about if you're Ty Lue going into the season?
You mentioned the backup four. I think that is a weakness. I think people I think the JaMychal Green loss was big for them. I do think that had JaMychal Green been retained, they might have been my favorite. And I know he's just a role player, eighth, ninth guy on the team, but I do think that was a big loss. We're having a lineup with, let's say Ibaka, him, Batum, Kennard, and Lue. Defensively in the backcourt, there are some issues there, but I think just having JaMychal as another 3-and-D big that you could rotate, play with Ibaka, play with Zoo, play him at the 5, that was a valuable piece that I think they missed, and is someone that they just didn't really replace that. I'm not a big Pat Patterson guy. I know some of Clippers Twitter is, but for me, he's not a top 10 rotation player on a championship team.
I agree.
He's just not. So and he's okay in certain matchups. He actually kind of randomly defended AD as well as you can for a bench big. And he's a decent post defender, but he can get exposed in the pick and roll. He's not a rebounder. He's not a rim protector. He just doesn't bring much outside of, threes and occasional post defense. And that to me is just not a top 10 guy on a championship team. So I suspect that might be something where if a guy's bought out, they look to kind of fill that hole, or maybe they just end up playing smaller and Batum plays the 4 on the second unit. But for me, the one that I think doesn't get talked about enough is that this team isn't that athletic. And I think everyone always focuses on Kawhi and PG, and yes, of course, those are the two athletic, rangy wings. But this team is not very athletic, and I think I don't know. Are they more athletic than last season? Maybe, but maybe
Serge, in terms of your effective athleticism defensively, I think Serge gives them something. But no, you make a good point there, and I'm a little bit worried about declines from guys like Beverly. Marcus Morris as an ISO defender looked like he was not that great at times with the Clippers. The thought was that he could switch, and he got beat pretty badly out in the perimeter sometimes. Ibaka is someone who could fall off a little bit. So
Trey Burke and Seth Curry abused them in that Dallas series. That was just ridiculous.
Yeah, Batum is another guy. I mean, there are definitely players who are at the time where they could experience a drop off, and if you get a couple of those, now all of a sudden you're looking pretty thin. But I'm going to assume that these guys are going to continue to play at their established levels until they don't. And Beverly, of course, he always seems to have something, right? And I think he, to me, is an insanely important piece. And we saw, I think, at his absence and inability to play that many minutes, that you can't replace it. They need someone who can guard the other team's point guards, and they need someone who is, can still shoot it on the other end and isn't going to be a liability. And Beverly is tough. He can be part of a switching scheme. If you now have to go to, we got to close games with Lou Williams or Luke Kennard, now you're right back where you were with giving the other team a place to attack at the end of games, and you're in big trouble against really elite teams.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people with the Clippers that would have said last season Pat was their third most important player, but behind the two stars. As you said, I mean, last year Luke wasn't on the team, but when he was out during the Dallas series, now you're going with Landry, Lue, or Reggie Jackson, and we saw how Lue is a noted defensive liability, but we saw how Reggie Jackson was kind of targeted and picked apart in that Dallas series, and I think that is probably the biggest defensive drop off. I mean, now for sure, it was arguably before, Zoo to Trez was, but I would say that there wasn't as big of a gap. But now it's clearly on the roster, from Pat to the backup point guard, situation. That is the biggest defensive drop off, I think, on the team. And, his injury history, his foul trouble, consistently kind of getting into that early foul trouble where he'll pick up 2 reach-in fouls.
First, that's why I think I thought that his making all defense last year was not deserved, in part because those fouls just don't your team's in the bonus and he doesn't have to pay for that a lot of times, or he's on the bench. The fouling is a problem. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's get it here. Predicted record for this Clippers season. If you're struggling with the 72 game conversion, my handy spreadsheet will happily convert 82 games to 72 games for you, if you would like. But I went first with my last guess, so you're up this time.
So it was a little straightforward for me. The Clippers played 72 games last year. They were one of the teams who had a clean 72. So they went 49-23, which I think was a 55.5 win pace over an 82 game season. I think that this season is going to be, they're going to be, as I said at the top, a little bit better. I do think that even if there is some regression, as you mentioned, with some of the role players, aging or just, natural regression, like there will be, I think, greater health this year on the flip side. Like they were one of the most injured teams. And if you looked at the teams that missed the same amount of games as them, it was the Golden State Warriors. It was the Detroit Pistons. Like it was teams at the bottom of their respective conferences. So, I think among contenders, they had the worst health luck. Now, there are some injury-prone guys on this team, and again, Pat Beverly, PG, Kawhi has his injury management stuff. So, like, some of those guys are still going to continue to miss games. But I do think their health, should be better. It doesn't mean it will be, but if you account for that, you account for some continuity, with the starting lineup returning, with a couple of the bench pieces returning. I do think overall this team should be slightly better than last season. So I'm picking them to go 51-21, which is a 58 win pace in 82 game regular season. So that is 2 games better than last season, and that is accounting for greater health with also the offset of some regression and aging to the supporting cast.
Yeah, I've really struggled with this because it's a 72 game season. They've got these guys who kind of need to be load managed for sure. There are going to be injuries. But on the other hand, you imagine that they're going to come out with the same mindset that the Lakers had a year ago, where they are really trying to get this taste out of their mouths. They, they had a month more rest than the Lakers did. They should have a decent amount of continuity. And you think that they really, just from a mental standpoint, are going to come out with fire in their eyes. And they're going to try, I think they're going to try to win a lot more games. I think the organization, is learned a little bit of a lesson from how they managed last year, and that they need to build some more during the regular season. And Paul George will be healthy from the start. On the other hand, 57 expected wins last year over an 82 game pace. I mean, that's pretty high. Like you and I actually you predicted 53 wins, although that they would win the championship, which I probably would have agreed with. And I predicted 52, and they were well above that pace, as it turned out, even with all the injuries. So all of those things, I really struggle to come up with where I think that's going to land. 51 feels a little bit high to me.
I also think that the rest of the league at the top kind of got worse.
But the bottom got better. You have a lot fewer free wins than you did last year.
But yeah, it just feels like to me like that kind of, if you have the Lakers, Clippers, and Bucks as your top 3 again, that kind of like 4 through 8, 4 through 9 range got a little bit worse, and then that like 10 through 15 range got better. So I feel like those teams are almost going to beat up on each other. But I'm with you. I think like there's going to be a lot more motivation with this team, and there was that sense last year that they didn't fully take the regular season, seriously. It was like, let's just get to the playoffs. We have the talent, and we'll figure out in the playoffs. Like we just want to get there healthy, and it doesn't matter what seed we are. We'll be fine. I think that's not going to be the attitude this season. I think they are going to take it more seriously, and I do think it's going to be a point of emphasis. Like, let's go get the 1 seed. Like, let's try to win as many games as possible. So doesn't mean it's going to happen, but I do think to your point, like there will be some added motivation for sure.
Yeah, and I think they're going to want to get that taste out of their mouths as soon as possible. I think I'll probably go with, I kind of see this as a 55 win team over the course of the season, but it does kind of make you think, like, why would they be worse than last year? I mean, maybe Kawhi doesn't play quite as well, and George doesn't play quite as well when he is healthy. I mean, I do think that Harold might be a more valuable regular season player, particularly, and Lou Williams isn't going to be as good this year. That's probably a big contributor to why they had a top 5 offense, and I could maybe see them taking a little bit of a step back offensively. They still were really good defensively somehow. It never really seemed that way. Except when they would have these dominating performances every once in a while, when they just like throttled Houston, or like they would kill Dallas, which was like a great offense. So I don't feel great about this, that this is going to be a common theme for me this year. But I think I would pick them to be a 55-win team, and that translates out to 48 wins, and you had 51. Best case scenario for these guys?
Win the 2021 championship.
Yeah.
I think, best case would be something like being a top 5 offense and defense again. Ty Lue embraces a more modern style of basketball, doesn't completely platoon the starting lineup and bench, and tinkers a bit, gets a lot of different lineups out there, different rotations, getting different guys playing with each other. I think like one thing that was really effective last season that we barely saw was Zubats and JaMychal Green. Those two, I forgot offhand what their net rating was together, but in the regular season it was pretty good. You just didn't see those two play that much together. So I think getting playoff. Lawrence Frank talked about it yesterday. Everything they did this offseason was geared towards the playoffs and our playoff rotation and just kind of making sure we're ready for that. So I do think some of that stuff being resolved, with optimizing the lineups and rotations. I think Ty can do that. So, and then the chemistry and leadership stuff, I doubt it's fully resolved, but maybe it's better. And they remain healthy. Like the health is going to be the biggest thing, I think, with this team, more so than most, just because they do have that track record of several guys being pretty injury riddled.
Yeah. How many wins would you say in the regular season for a best case scenario?
I think that they could be 61 pace. I don't think that would be crazy.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's 52 or 53.
Yeah, a 60 win pace would be 53 wins. So yeah,
I wouldn't be shocked by that.
Yeah, and I would say that 54 wins, so that it's like a 61, 62 win pace as well. So that's they definitely could be the way. I'm just having so much trouble in my head translating, because usually I'll be like, okay, what were they last year? How did they get better? How did they get worse? How does that translate compared to what they did last year? I'm just having a lot of trouble like making that conversion in my head because there are just so many confounding factors, it feels like.
And that's the thing, like that was so confusing about last season is, we've talked a lot about the chemistry and continuity, but there were so many, they had the injuries, they had the midseason, additions and changes with Marcus Morris and Reggie Jackson, and they never practiced, and you could put, there's just so many factors that I felt like were working against them. And in spite of all that, they had that, they still were the 2 seed. They still were top 5 offense defense. They still were in prime position to make the conference finals before, an epic collapse. So I do think that if some of those factors don't go against them as strongly as they did last year, like this team arguably could be as good as we thought they were going to be. And nearly was essentially.
How about a worst case scenario?
Worst case for me, I didn't put down a record. I would say losing in the second round again. I don't see, we're saying worst case realistically, like of course Kawhi or PG could go down.
Right.
Dramatically changes.
This team's outcome. With that, with reasonable amount of injuries, not, Kawhi Leonard, injures his quad on the first day of the season and misses the whole year, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I would say losing in the second round again, and it being kind of the same weaknesses and issues exposed, which would be some of the perimeter defense. I think they obviously had Kawhi, PG, and Pat, but it was like outside of that, like anytime anyone else was on the floor, they were getting targeted. Whether it was Lue, Reggie, Landry, those guys really got exposed in the playoffs, and they're bringing back 2 of the 3, and then they replaced the third one with, as you said earlier, like arguably a worse defender. So that's still going to be an issue. Again, we don't really know what's going on with like the 9th or 10th spot in the rotation. If Nick Batum is done, you could be looking at an 8-man rotation in the regular season, in which depth might have never be more important than this season with COVID and the the shortened condensed schedule. Like
sure,
depth is going to be really important, and so I would just say they end up losing in the second round. This time, not some epic collapse, but just the weaknesses are exposed. And, again, they arguably could have lost or been pushed to 7 in that first round series against Dallas. So I don't think it would be insane for them to, be basically at the same level and end up losing for similar reasons. So I would say, offensive stagnation, They didn't add that high-level playmaker or ball handler. They still don't have a bunch of high-level passers. And then again, the chemistry and continuity. Like maybe Ty Lue isn't able to manage the locker room. Maybe the role players don't really make that much of a difference, like the new guys. So, and you still have Kawhi and PG doing the same stuff. You still have some of the same issues, and they're just undone in the second round. So I think that's kind of their range to me is barring something insane happening, it's second round to championship.
Yeah, I would say, under normal circumstances, 49 wins. So that works out to 43 normally would be about a worst case regular season scenario. And maybe I could see them losing in the first round. That really more is dependent on who else is out there in the West. But how does that happen? Kawhi Leonard kind of looks a little bit more like the guy at the end of the Denver series. I don't expect that, but, or he's going to miss 20 games because of load management, and Paul George is like not playing at an all-star level anymore. I think that's possible with him being 31 before the end of the season, and just a lot of these kind of older guys. I mean, they got a lot of guys in that range where you don't expect them to have a major drop-off, but it's still a significant possibility. And if some of those go wrong, then all of a sudden you could be looking at Kawhi Leonard and kind of a bunch of guys, which, that's not that good. Kawhi Leonard is a great player, but that's not that good of a team.
I would agree with that. I don't. It's hard for me to see them only winning. Well, you said 49, so that would be 43, and I guess that's probably their floor. 48, 49.
All right, man. This is a lot of fun as usual. Thanks so much for coming on. It's good getting into the reporting, getting into this team. No one knows them like you, so it's really fantastic to have you on. We appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on again.